I think you're really trying to discuss issues where we can find common ground when there are ideological differences without being mean. And she'd like capitalize mean. I learned things I didn't know, and Joe's my kid. There's that. Thanks, Mom.
She is my mother. Love you, Mom. Hey everybody, welcome back to Human Reaction, your weekly source for independent commentary on cultural news and politics. Friends, we are so excited to have our very own bald hero, David
I'm back, baby! Woo!
back in the studio.
Right from Epstein's Island.
Just clipping the mics right out of the gate.
Surprise, motherfucker.
Yeah, it's like you forgot how podcasts work.
Yeah, just yelling.
How was your time on Epstein's Island?
It was exciting.
Yeah?
Meet anyone?
Well, we might actually find out because we got a package mailed anonymously to the studio today. I have it right here. I think there's a videotape inside.
Is it from Jerusalem?
You know, we'll be, I don't know, but we're going to find out. We're going to review this on the skiff. This is certainly a closed door conversation that we're going to be having. David, what are we talking about today?
So Tim Walz was cucked by his family when they came out as Trump supporters. It's a fun story this week. Kamala Harris finally talks to the media, spending approximately 63% of her 16 minutes cackling like the Wicked Witch of the West, but managed to gasp out a few answers between laughing.
Sort of.
Is your favorite podcaster a Russian agent? We'll find out.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Is that us?
Is that us?
Yeah.
I'm my favorite podcaster.
But when you find out the numbers, you're going to wish you were a Russian agent. Okay.
Hey, Russia. We are taking checks.
And our boy, Liam McCollum, also a Russian agent, is going to be joining us. Fun story. Winston Churchill may have made World War II into a global war in order to preserve what he could of the British Empire from German competition.
All right.
That's not a joke. That's just sad.
Yeah.
That's just what it is.
Yeah, Tucker apparently had a Nazi on. Like that's what the internet is telling me. So we're gonna get into that.
We will. But before we do, Kyle, what do we have to say?
I just want to make sure everybody that likes, follows, comments, subscribes, and leaves a review on whichever platform you're watching us on, whether it be YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Hit the notification bell on YouTube too, because then you can see every time we drop something instantly when it happens. Because sometimes it doesn't go into your subscription feed.
That's very true.
You got to use that extra little notification bell.
And on that note, I will say you're going to want to use the notification bell because next Tuesday, is the first presidential debate, I guess the only presidential debate between Trump and Kamala Harris. And we will be doing a live stream Tuesday night during the debate. So definitely hit that up. And then we'll be doing an extra little bit of content after that for Skiff members. So if you're not a member yet, now's a great time to do that.
Yeah, and Joe and I we live streamed the Biden-Trump debate, and that was super fun to have everybody in there. I kind of see why live streamers do it. You're just like, ooh, all these people talking. Ooh.
Yeah, we got a little like chat going on the side.
People cracking jokes. It's hilarious. It made a very kind of dull debate a lot more fun.
Indeed. Now I'm wondering if Kamala is going to bring Tim Walz to the debate with her too.
Well, yeah, that is an important thing because from the Discord we have Kamala Harris with her emotional support Tim, which I think is very relevant to one of the topics that we're going to be covering. Two of the topics really that we're going to be covering today.
Yes. So I like that vest.
That's so triggering to me.
But yeah, join our Discord and also find ways to support us because our supporters are the lifeblood of this channel by going to humanreactionpod.com, and you can give us support on be a YouTube member or our Substack, where we provide additional content, about an hour more of content that we record after these episodes for everybody.
That's right. There is a link in the description for anybody that would be interested in checking that out, joining the Discord or becoming a member. And speaking of members, we want to thank all of our subscribers today really fast. From YouTube, we've got Bridgemeister, Isaac, Sam, Dave, Sleeper JD, Kendall, Burley, Justin, Kaylee, Emily, Ethan, Wiz, Randy and Cindy, Eric, Noah, Liam, and Russell. And from Substack, we have Patrick and Katie, Evan, Zach, and my mom, Lauren. Love you, Mom. Thanks for supporting the show. All right.
She left a nice review for us.
She did leave us a nice review. Can the public see that? Because I think that everyone should be able to read
That
it.
will be...
Oh, it's already been in the show.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Read it again. If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thune at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices
and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success, from grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management. Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL patriots.com.
This episode is brought to you by Revved Up Promo, the official apparel partner of Human Reaction. Revved Up is a premier full-service shop specializing in laser engraving, screen printing, and embroidery. Not only are they now making all of our apparel right down the road from us, they can do the same for your brand and ship it to you anywhere in the world. Revved Up helps you navigate the extensive universe of merch options and uses state-of-the-art techniques to showcase your brand in its very best light. So if you want to support our show and our generous sponsor, you can now do so by buying our merch and by turning to Revved Up Promo for your own custom apparel needs. Reach them at revveduppromo.com. That's with 2 V's and 2 P's, or just check the show notes for a link.
So we'll get into the first thing, a quick little story that was just kind of fun and also interesting. I wonder what the repercussions of this are really, but we have here, apparently Tim Walz's family really likes Trump. So we have a bunch of the members of the family with Walz for Trump shirts. At first, I wasn't sure how much of this was like a propaganda psyop from the Trump camp, because there was originally a Tim Walz, his brother. There was a bunch of Facebook comments that went public of people asking Tim Walz about his brother and things like that. And he's like, I haven't talked to my brother in 8 years. He's kind of a creep, all this stuff. Which
Weirdo.
I think goes in, he's weird.
It's very weird.
But I think it goes into, I think a lot of people, I felt this way. I know people like Tucker Carlson have said this too, where there's like this weird vibe that you get from Tim Walz. There's kind of like, everybody's like, oh, he's this high school coach and all this stuff. And there's like this, there's a weird energy about him that I think a lot of people feel. And when you have his brother come out and be like, yeah, I haven't talked to my brother in 8 years. I don't like the guy. It's kind of, it's just a weird dynamic, you know?
Yeah.
And often it's weird bringing people's family into it, but it is one of these things where there's like a weird kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
I feel
and
it
the
too.
media made it fair game when they went after RFK Jr. for his family, not all supporting him.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, an enormous family too. I mean, and
A Kennedy family.
also, who cares? Right. Like, it's not important to anything. Right. Other than now that's the standard. This is the standard. So
Well,
it should matter.
To be fair, I do feel like family life is a bit important for your leaders.
Yeah.
Like that is, not everything is just policy. There's also the
cat ladies.
childless cat ladies, as JD Vance would
Family
say.
is not everything for childless cat ladies, unless you count the cats, which
Well, it's one of those things because oftentimes family life, I think, informs a leader's psychology. It was actually, I was just listening to Thomas Massey on Nicole Shanahan's podcast. Nicole Shanahan was the running mate of RFK. She's, like everybody, gone into the podcasting world now. And she was interviewing Thomas Massey, and they were talking about Thomas Massey's wife passing, and it was pretty emotional. But Thomas had said that one of the constant factors of the people who you think are going to be really good and then they get elected and then they're really bad often is their wife. It's like, how involved are they with like the husband's life? And the ones that are kind of more distant versus the ones that are very helpful and supportive, there's like a very deep, distant, it often showcases with like how much they conform to the system versus like they have this backbone structure for them. And there's something to that, which I think is just like an interesting abstraction across all this, where when you see the family life, I think that is really important for your leaders. So when people look at that, they're kind of like, oh, why does his family all seem to hate him? You know, like, that's like a,
Why does he shake his wife's hand?
That is a peculiar
it was
question.
weird.
Yeah. What I mean is just like the family as political football, especially children, but these are all adults. So it's just like, it's complicated the way I feel about it. Because part of me just looks at this and be like, it's just sad, man.
Yeah.
I just feel bad. You know, if you haven't spoken to your brother in 8 years, that like hits me. I'm like, ow.
Totally. Well, I mean,
sucks.
you know, to be clear, like those are the Nebraska Walzes, so there might be some Minnesota Walzes that are on his team.
Yeah.
You know, and if so, like they should probably looks like they could put together a pretty solid basketball team. Maybe they just play it out on the court and see what happens. You know?
well, and here's Donald Trump makes a comment about it, which is kind of funny.
college education, legal driver's licenses.
I was so honored
And
today.
she wants a path to
His
citizenship.
brother endorsed me.
I saw it.
I saw the picture. And honestly, it was a very nice looking family. But his brother endorsed me and the whole family endorsed me. I said, who are all the people?
Let me play
Tell
Kamala.
you, there's something weird with that guy. He's a weird guy.
College education.
Just using their own ammo right against him.
That was a lot.
You know, and I
they
wonder-
endorsed me. They're a beautiful family.
And I wonder the degree to which the initial JD Vance's weird was an inoculation technique, right? So if you do a pre-poll, like a
Wait. Are you saying this is pre-programming?
no.
Okay. I'm just making sure.
Inoculation is not the same, but these are different claims.
I'm just like needling you about it.
Audio listeners could hear that eye roll.
All the way into the back of his head.
What I mean. So inoculation and campaign strategy is if you want to keep a media story about yourself from sticking, you accuse your opponent of it, or you come out and talk about it yourself first before they can. So that way, when it's brought up, they'd be like, well, you're accusing them of the thing you are, right?
Yeah.
Or you could say, well, he already addressed that. So it's really two different faces to inoculation.
Yeah.
So if they did like a focus group poll of his reputation as governor, and one of the things that came out was
He's
well, he's kind of weird. He's weird. There's something weird about him. If that was known
tampons
then,
in boys' bathrooms. It's kind of weird.
one of the things you do is you front load that into the campaign and you accuse the other side of it, because you can't come out. That's one of the ones you have to accuse the other side of, because you can't come out and be like, I know he's weird, but or something like that. You
Like,
gotta
I'm
say
not
the other
weird.
guy is.
Which is kind of, isn't that the story of everything around Trump? Is they constantly like will accuse him, and then it just turns out like 2 years later, like Hillary Clinton was doing the exact same thing or whatever. Like,
Well, he's a threat to
that's kind of the
democracy.
story.
Meanwhile, they're like
Suspending democracy.
upending their own primaries, and
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Well,
So who actually got golden showers on the Democratic side?
This is a great question. Probably some Epstein clients, I would imagine.
probably. Which we'll be talking about Trump's comments on Epstein in the Skiff episode
That's right.
too.
That's right.
Because he had an interview with Lex Friedman.
Yes. Well, speaking of Kamala and Tim, Kamala did her first interview after how many days as the official candidate?
I don't know.
Like 40 or something
like
like
40,
that?
50, something like that.
So, well, you watched the whole thing.
But yeah, I'm sorry.
I couldn't quite make
Yes,
it through
that
the whole
sucks.
thing. David, did you
It's a
watch
great
it?
sacrifice you've made for our democracy, Kyle.
You didn't miss much.
I didn't watch
What's
nothing.
weird is weird.
Weird.
What's weird is how long they sat down versus how much they actually used of the footage. And you're like, what did they? And it's also some of the answers. You're like, wait, so they cut a bunch of stuff, but they left that in? Yeah, like there's like stuff like that where
Yeah.
you're like,
Wait,
ugh.
do you know how long it was? Like they actually sat down? I didn't.
It was
see
like
that.
it was like 48 minutes or something. It was 40 something
Okay.
minutes.
So
and,
they put out 2640 of it.
Had to cut out all that laughing.
and about 8 minutes of that was Tim Walz. So there was like 16 minutes of Kamala.
Yeah, it was 6. I did the math. I listened and counted how long all her answers were. She spoke for a total of 16 minutes and 37 seconds.
Cue the beautiful mime music.
This is
Yeah, no, that was painful.
this is why the CIA loves him, is because he keeps good notes. Good notes.
Very diligent.
He's a good asset. But yeah, no. So there's a few questions here of one in particular that caught my eye is Dana Bash, who works for CNN. She was one of the moderators at the Trump-Biden debate, but she's big CNN personality. She asked Kamala a question of what about the people who want to go back? Because that's like their slogan is "We're not going back." So here's a clip from that.
You talked about, you call it the opportunity economy. You are well aware that right now many Americans are struggling. There's a crisis of affordability. One of your campaign themes is we're not going back. But I wonder what you say to voters who do want to go back when it comes to the economy specifically, because their groceries were less expensive, housing was more affordable when Donald Trump was president.
Well, let's start with the fact that when Joe Biden and I came in office, during the height of a pandemic, we saw over 10 million jobs were lost. people, I mean, literally, we were all tracking the numbers. Hundreds of people a day were dying because of COVID. The economy had crashed. In large part, all of that because of mismanagement by Donald Trump of that crisis. When we came in, our highest priority was to do what we could to rescue America. And today, we know that we have inflation at under 3%. A lot of our policies have led to the reality that America recovered faster than any wealthy nation around the world. But you are right. Prices, in particular for groceries, are still too high. The American people know it, I know it. Which is why my agenda includes
Emotional
what we
support,
need to
Tim.
do to bring down the price of groceries. For example, dealing with an issue like price gouging.
Can we pause? I know we're going to get to the content here, but I just want to point out from a media perspective, it's very weird how high he is in the frame versus her. He has a very sort of like commanding presence, and she's like positioned
was
downward.
Like leaning.
She looks
There's
tiny.
a table, so
Yes.
she's like leaning on it. Kind of
that's-
how I was last week.
And that's fine. But if I were the strategist here working for them, I would not have this dynamic in play.
My suspicion is that like when she starts giving a stupid answer, he kicks her under the table or something.
Well, and that's fine. You know, have the shot collar on, right? But just from a visual perspective, it does not put her in a position of feeling or looking authoritative. Just I
Yeah,
just
they
wanna bring
needed
that.
they needed to put his stool down so his head is below hers,
Yeah.
and so he's just
Or
like
at
this
least-
little tiny man.
They should have given him like a children's chair. You see, like a preschool.
a booster seat for Kamala.
At very least level would have been a good start. But
Yeah, no, there is a thing about that, and I saw a lot of people make those types of comments where the general aesthetic of it felt very
yeah, they're in
off.
this like dark like diner
Yeah.
thing. I don't know. It just
Yeah,
visually
the
very
whole aesthetic feels off. Like there's just like this feeling that's just like they could have done better quality.
Weird.
Well, it could have been better quality. It seems like, right?
I could see that. But I don't know how much of that is within their control. I'm sure they have some say, but
Yeah, no, I mean, it's honestly probably on CNN's part of they probably should have done better quality on it.
yeah. I mean, you would think.
But
What we need to do to extend the child tax credit to help young families be able to take care of their children in their most formative years. What we need to do to bring down the cost of housing. My proposal includes what would be a tax credit of $25,000 for first-time home buyers, so they can just have enough to put a down payment on a home, which is part of the American dream and their aspiration, but do it in a way that allows them to actually get on the path to achieving that goal and that dream.
So, we got a fact checker real quick. According to Our World in Data, the number of deaths per day in the United States in 2001 was 8,737.
2021.
In 21, yeah.
Was how many?
8,000.
Or sorry, 9,500 per day. Yeah,
And so she
all
said
costs.
100.
She was hundreds in COVID, right?
Yeah.
That's a rounding error, right? That's like a very small proportion of the total amount, especially when right now it's at 8,300, right? So if 100 people were dying per day on COVID, it wouldn't even show up in this number.
Yeah, that's
Well,
off by
she
an order
also
of
said
magnitude.
that 200 million people died from it.
Yes, yeah. In other
Numbers,
places.
maybe not as
Trying
strong.
to say it's like he's to blame for all COVID deaths, and then also where did all those job losses come from, Kamala? Like whose policies were ending all the jobs in 2020?
Right. Well, I mean, I suppose you could point the finger at Trump because he was at, the helm of that. But I think, can you say it was his fault? Because he kind of just deferred to the governors,
Yeah,
right?
this is a state phenomenon. I mean, a state policy question, right? Those jobs weren't lost in Florida as much as they were in California, of course,
Right.
because they didn't lock down as long.
Right.
So this is like obviously a deflection, and the fact that CNN would fact check almost anyone on that deflection right off the bat, but does not challenge her here, is obviously demonstrative of their bias.
Completely.
And I'm not just saying this to try to make fun of her, but Kyle, did you notice like her mouth seemed weird? Like no, I'm not even kidding. Like it was like they gave her like a numbing agent to like not.
I
laugh.
actually did notice that. I
my
know what you
goodness.
mean.
What?
I know what
To
you mean.
not laugh?
Like it felt like her
What do you mean?
lower right side was like almost seemed like droopy-ish.
She just went to the dentist.
Maybe she got some Botox or something.
Oh, it does kind of.
Yeah, like it looks like she's packing a lip almost.
Yeah, I don't know. But then there's also other questions, because one of the things that's been hit with Kamala recently is in the 2020. Well, just more broadly speaking, it's that she's not running on the record that she ran on in 2020, or like the policy platform that she ran on, where she was talking about things like I'm going to ban fracking. Those were statements that she made in 2019. And then now all of a sudden she's not going to. And this is one of the questions that is laid out to her. And it's actually like, it's one of those things. The story of this interview actually is Dana Bash is asking a lot of the correct questions to her, but it's almost like these should be the questions that your team has thought of and scripted for you, where you should have really good answers on them. And it's like, because Dana Bash is not pushing back on anything. So it's just like, here's what people are saying about you. Here's a chance for you to correct the record. Like that's kind of what the questions are, rather than pushing into her further.
Right.
And so a lot of people were like, oh, Dana Bash asked the right questions, but it's like, yeah, but it's kind of like the way she's going about it.
Yeah. I mean, it also felt like she was, when Harris wouldn't answer kind of a great answer, she'd kind of like give her an assist too. She'd be like for this one, I think she's like, but is it like, did you see any research or like more experience that changed her mind? And like,
yeah, she's trying to help her give a better answer almost, right? Yeah, and then Kamala doesn't. Like, there's a lot of those types of moments. But here, we'll showcase this one, which is her talking about the fracking thing.
Get some clarity on where you stand on some key policy issues. Energy is a big one. When you were in Congress, you supported the Green New Deal. And in 2019, you said, quote, there is no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. Fracking, as you know, is a pretty big issue, particularly in your must-win state of Pennsylvania.
Sure.
Do you still want to ban fracking?
No, and I made that clear on the debate stage in 2020, that I would not ban fracking. As vice president, I did not ban fracking. As president, I will not ban fracking.
In 2019, I believe, at a town hall, you said you were asked, would you commit to implementing a federal ban on fracking on your first day in office? And you said, there's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. So yes. So it changed in that campaign?
In 2020, I made very clear where I stand. We are in 2024, and I've not changed that position, nor will I going forward. I kept my word, and I will keep my word.
What made you change that position at the time?
Well, let's be clear. My values have not changed. I believe it is very important that we take seriously what we must do to guard against what is a clear crisis in terms of the climate. And to do that, we can do what we have accomplished thus far. The Inflation Reduction Act, what we have done to invest, by my calculation, over probably $1 trillion over the next 10 years, investing in a clean energy economy. What we've already done, creating over 300,000 new clean energy jobs. That tells me, from my experience as vice president, we can do it without banning fracking. In fact, Dana, excuse me.
It is Dana.
The funny thing is that it is Dana Bash.
Close enough. But Kamala, I don't know.
Gotta fill air.
Well, it is funny because there's something about the cadence in which she talks, which Trump said it before, where he's like, she speaks in rhyme. Mm-hmm. There's like a cadence of her speaking, which is like, it always feels very weird to me, where I'm like, I don't know where.
It's like she's trying to channel Obama's oratory skills, but without like the substance to back it.
Yeah.
Really, and not that like Obama spoke with a ton of substance. He actually kind of spoke in a lot of platitudes as well, but there's this sort of like thing she's trying to put on that I don't think is quite landing.
Her style. So, it is nice to see some truth, which is that the Inflation Reduction Act had nothing to do with inflation at all. It was actually just a Green New Deal the entire time.
I know. I love
and that's why they passed it.
I love how she's like, yeah, climate change is this big issue. The Inflation Reduction Act, for example. Like, what?
Did it reduce inflation?
Wait, was that can you finish that clip?
Yeah, I can finish the clip.
I just want to...
Is there more to it here?
Well, I cast the
I don't
tie-breaking
remember
vote.
if Dana jumps in here.
That actually increased leases for fracking as vice president. So I'm very clear about where I stand.
And was there some policy or scientific data that you saw that you said, oh, okay, I get it now?
Yeah, see?
What I have seen is that we can grow and we can increase a thriving clean energy economy without banning fracking.
The answer is no. There was no research.
Actually, she could. That was such an easy layup. She could have knocked it out of the park. She said, "Yeah, fracking reduces total amounts of carbon output. Why? Because natural gas burns cleaner than coal." If you just knew anything, if you just know something about something, the reason why the U.S. is probably in more compliance with the Paris Climate Accords than most of Europe is because Europe ended nuclear and replaced it with coal as a backup and natural gas. And what we did was end coal and move to natural gas. That's a marginal improvement than nuclear, which has no carbon output. And God, so it's so crazy to watch her like get this like this alley oop, and she's like, wow, just fumbles the shit out of it. She trips. Just like it's such an easy layup.
Well, it's also one of those things where when you say I'm going to ban fracking, there's the context of, well, what audience is she speaking to?
Yes.
And is she just trying to appease a very specific crowd in that moment? And then all of a sudden when she's on the debate stage, well, I can't be the person that's completely anti-fracking because, donors and things like that.
But to be fair, though, there are probably Pennsylvania Democrats that watch CNN who are going to be listening very intently to that answer.
Yeah.
Because their jobs depend on fracking.
What we're probably witnessing here is that there are interest groups that want to ban fracking regardless, right? Just because it's carbon. And then there are votes she needs that need fracking. So she's stuck, right?
Yeah.
So she has to just pretend like this is an issue.
It's a similar thing where the Democrat Party is stuck on things like Israel Palestine too, right? Where she has to be in this like weird, well, I'm gonna Bibi Netanyahu has to be able to do whatever he wants, but also blah blah. And she has to like sit in this weird zone right now, which is angering a lot of supporters, and then also angering the other supporters, because she's taking a middle position, right?
Yeah,
and that is kind of the state of the Democratic Party right now, is they're taking these middle positions on things rhetorically, but the middle position angers this side and also angers this side when she's trying to find a compromise.
How do we reconcile this with polling that shows that she's like in the lead in some instances?
Well, I mean, like when we talked about the polling a couple weeks ago, how I explained it, and I think this is still true. We're kind of like in a honeymoon phase of Democrats and people who lean left, who are in the middle, just having someone who's fully conscious, as their candidate. So they're excited about it, but they're not. And obviously, she went an entire month without having any policy position. So she's a rebranded, revivified character in the public imagination. Therefore, it's going to express itself in polling is stronger than it is. But also noting all the polling is exactly what you would guess in any presidential election too. It's really close.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's a presidential election.
Sure.
Right? It's all within margin. Basically what it means, most of that polling means we don't know. Right? It's a 5-point margin on either side, meaning if it's 49-49 or 51-49, that doesn't mean one is up. That means we don't know, right? People don't understand statistical margins very well, because it basically means that we're guessing with 4 points on either side of where we're at. So that means it could be 44-51.
Yeah,
we don't know, or it could be really close.
I did just have somebody just sent me a poll right before we started recording, and it was showing, and it was like new information. So we've had this honeymoon phase, but now it appears that honeymoon phase is starting to lift a little bit. And I'd be curious after the debate next week how far that goes, depending on the performances here. But I was just seeing the polling was showing that pretty much in every swing state, Trump is now statistically ahead and kind of escaping the outside of margin of error there. So we'll see where that lies. Because I think the honeymoon phase is kind of ending right now. And it's something that, like we said last week on the podcast, is, on the right, there's this cult of personality around Trump, where on the left, it's much more of like a cult of institutions. It's a cult of the machine. And a lot of people were like, okay, the head of the machine or the perceived figurehead of the machine was failing and the machine is dying. But like the machine clearly is working for them because they believe in the machine so much, because it got rid of the bad candidate and then installed a new candidate, and it's like, okay, the machine is good, yes, keep going with the machine type of type of deal. Right. And that's what people are excited about. Like, and if you talk to a Democrat, most Democrats are not excited about Kamala. They're much more interested. They'll often usually actually say to you, it's about the people around them.
Yeah,
it's about the people around them.
And less so, even less so that it's much more anti-Trump than it is pro-Kamala, which ultimately the question is, and this has been the challenge for conservatives and Republicans for a very long time. It's very difficult to build excitement and energy around being anti something. You have to be for something. Being for hope and change creates momentum and a cult of personality and all that kind of stuff. Being pro making America great again versus I'm going to repeal the government. That's not an appealing thing. Or being I'm not Donald Trump. That's not very appealing. That's enough to maybe get some votes, but it's not enough to create energy and excitement. Get your guys out walking doors, get your people making phone calls, get your people actually out campaigning for you, which is what Obama had and that's what Trump has.
Yeah.
Right. So that difference in fundamental energy level is because the messaging isn't isn't there, or at least the mission isn't clear to the people who are at stake.
There's a good point with that too, is if we look at 2016 for Trump versus 2020 for Trump, the energy levels for Trump were way down. And I think a lot of it had to do with COVID and things like that, where the energy levels for 2016 was like, okay, this is exciting and new for a large swath of people that were not normally also just like right-wing voters. Like there's like this new demographic that had entered the conversation when it came around Trump. And I think coming back to 2024, there's a new excitement for Trump again. And I think a lot of it has to do with like this big tent dynamic that is starting to form that we didn't have in 2020, where there is this excitement that exists there, where a lot of people that would have been kind of like, man, really wasn't satisfied with Trump's like first term, but I'm more on that side. Like they didn't really feel it in 2020, where I think a lot of people are like, okay, Trump's kind of proven to me that those errors have been erased a lot, and there's like this new thing, and a lot of people are excited for that right now. But also there's kind of the dynamic of like, oh man, he was also just shot, and there's like a coup at the Democratic Party. Like we're in an interesting historical moment, and people are feeling that groundswell, right?
Yeah,
I think that's right.
Very interesting. Polymarket has Trump up 51% to Kamala Harris's 47%, with Trump trending down 3% in the last period and Kamala up 1%. So again, to your point, all within like a fairly close margin of error. I don't know that they actually have a margin of error.
That margin wouldn't apply to that.
Right.
That's prediction market.
This isn't a poll, right? So it doesn't. That's
people
apply,
betting money on it,
but it's close.
Right, and it could be predictive, just even if it's not a poll, right?
Yes.
Well, because a lot of people betting large sums of money, because there's millions of dollars of liquidity in those betting pools right there. A lot of those people they're not just that, like they're taking the sentiment that they're seeing everywhere in making their bets, right? And a lot of people are like, well, I'm not going to bet against the deep state, and then they'll bet on Kamala. It's not necessarily her viability as a candidate. Like a lot of people are betting on like cheating in elections and things like that. Is media corruption going to happen as we're seeing like Telegram getting taken down and all these things, right? You know, like a lot of people are betting on those things as well, which are not necessarily just polling. Right. So like there's more variables that go into your decision on the bet.
There's more information embedded in the actual calculus of this versus a poll.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where polling is simply just, what do you feel about Kamala? You know? right. Like it's a bit different.
Right. If the election were held today, who would you vote for?
Yeah, that type of stuff. And those things are wishy-washy. People change. Also, a lot of people might have different. It's like who you're polling from on the betting. Like that's a thing with polling, is a lot of people, they have like a lot of polling organizations. They have kind of like, oh, these are the types of people that take polls all the time, so we're going to call them more often. Right. Like they will have those embedded in their polling for who they're calling, because it's like those people will actually pick up the phone and talk. Right. And so you end up getting like a constant sample size of the same type of people oftentimes.
Yeah. And you try to adjust that with your after poll adjustments to make them representative of the group they represent, right? But that doesn't mean they necessarily follow that group. Does that make sense? So you call the same 35-year-old female who always answers polls, and you make that represent all the 35-year-old females in that area of the country.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So here's another interesting moment from it. It's her talking about the border czar immigration stuff. And spoiler, it's all Trump's fault, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Administration worked with members of the United States Congress on an immigration issue that is very significant to the American people and to our security, which is the border. And through bipartisan work, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Congress, a bill was crafted, which we supported, which I support. And Donald Trump got word of this bill that would have contributed to securing our border, and because he believes that it would not have helped him politically, he told his folks in Congress, don't put it forward. He killed the bill. A border security bill that would have put 1,500 more agents on the border. And let me tell you something, the Border Patrol endorsed the bill. And I'm sure in large part because they knew they were working around the clock, and 1,500 more agents would help them. That bill would have allowed us to increase seizures of fentanyl. Ask any community in America that has been devastated by fentanyl what passing that bill would have done to address their concern and a pain that they've experienced.
So you would push that legislation again. I just want to ask
Not only push it, I will make sure that it comes to my desk and I would sign it.
Just one other question.
So that immigration bill, she's talking about Trump told Republicans to turn it down. Remind me what happened to that immigration bill. Wasn't that immigration bill also tied to like massive Ukraine funding and things like that? Wasn't that? I don't remember off the top of my head what that immigration bill was, but it was if I remember correctly, it was like a hodgepodge of things where it's like that Republicans just could not get behind, right?
I think it was. I feel like we talked about it.
We did talk about it.
I feel like it was Ukraine and Israel, and then Taiwan shit all in it too.
Yeah, it was just like massive amounts of spending in foreign aid and stuff like that.
I've got this here from Brookings.edu. It says, last October, Senate Republicans made it clear that they would not back additional aid for Ukraine without a bill that would help secure the southern border of the United States. So
that's a different bill in what she's talking about, though.
Is that?
But then didn't they pass a bill?
This is the Border Act of
anyways,
2024.
And then didn't have border shit.
Border bill fails.
Should have looked that up prior then.
Yeah, I feel like
No, it's okay.
Mike Johnson
At least one thing to make clear
I've got it
for
here.
people is that it wasn't the Border Patrol that endorsed the bill. It was the Border Patrol Union, because it increases wages for Border Patrol members and increases the amount of Border Patrol agents, which obviously benefits the union. So that's a complication that we talked about at the time that I remember, but I don't remember exactly what else was in the bill.
Yeah, so this here from May 23rd, 2024 from AP says that the legislation negotiated by a bipartisan group of senators was already rejected by most Republicans in February when it was linked to a foreign aid package for Ukraine, Israel, and other U.S. allies. So it was linked to foreign aid, which is why many Republicans rejected it.
And it was like an absurd amount of money too.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like it was
Remember
like
that.
60, another 60 to Ukraine or something like that.
Yeah.
I think it was
something.
80 if I remember.
In any case.
It was a lot.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where it's very easy to be like, and this is a very common tactic in legislation where you put a bunch of things together into a bill and you make it so that the other side can't really vote for it because there's this one thing that everybody's kind of in agreement on, but then there's all this other stuff. Well, it's like, well, I can't. And there's like, well, they voted it down.
Right.
They voted it down. Right.
Yeah, a couple other things. So as far as for the immigration component of it, included a pathway for citizenship that some conservatives objected to. It included it lack enforcement mechanisms for people who are already illegally immigrated. Integration of E-Verify and with like
it was the E-Verify bill.
E-Verify
That's right. Yeah, Thomas Massey made a huge stink about that. I remember that.
It instituted a mandatory use of E-Verify. What's
that?
E-Verify?
It's verification when it comes to like employment and stuff like that, and it's basically just a large bulk collection of data on everybody on all of their personal lives. When it comes to medical records and when it comes to just all sorts of things, and it was a big push that I remember. Thomas Massey was the big guy spearheading. Like, no, we cannot vote for this bill because of the Z-Verify deal.
So is that just like more invasion of privacy concern? Like, is that the
That's surveillance.
Okay.
General surveillance, social credit type of stuff.
Yeah, so that's why
moving
some
towards that
conservatives-
direction.
Explain it to me like I'm 5.
Yeah, it was the E-Verify thing. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like that's the thing.
But-
where when people do this with the legislation stuff, it's like,
But to be fair, many conservatives opposed it, I'm sure, for the real reason that they would supported more funding for Israel and Ukraine and all that kind of stuff. They would have voted for that. They would have voted
Ukraine
for
less
E-Verify.
so. Ukraine less so.
But I
than
think
the
there's a lot
Republicans.
in Congress, not Republicans in general, Republicans in Congress that have voted consistently for Ukraine funding, especially like people like Speaker Johnson, who at this very time was pushing for Ukraine funding.
Well, and
things like
she
that.
says it was a bipartisan bill, so like there was a bunch of Republicans that were on board.
But Speaker Johnson killed this. Probably more so to not give Democrats a win, more so than anything else, right? So like they don't actually care that much about a pathway to citizenship. They don't actually care that much about E-Verify and that sort of things. Thomas Massey does, but not a lot of these Republican congressmen.
So they
really care about is not giving. Kamala Harris is a terrible candidate, bad VP, all these things. But she's right that much of this is a political football that has been kicked around for decades, and they want to keep it that way because that is a pathway for greater Republican victory. And the number one thing people legislate for is the maintenance of power first, and good policy second, maybe even third. So like, I just don't want to give the illusion of like Republican virtue in this. There's it's an illusion, right?
Yeah.
That's
It
intentionally
was politically motivated. Whether or not it came from Trump directly, or if it was just a broad Republican strategy.
I wouldn't be surprised if it
doesn't
came
matter.
from Trump directly, right?
But it is also an important thing to note, though, is that there were terrible things in the bill.
Yes,
that's also important.
And things I object to,
Yeah.
but also things I support. Like you have to deal with the immigration problem in the United States of existing people, especially who am I thinking of? People who came here as children and grew up in the United States. Like, what do you do with those? Yeah, dreamers. What do you do with those? Like, and there are some conservatives who would vote against this bill specifically because it had that in there, and many who don't care about that issue at all and voted against it for political purposes. So.
There's another thing on here where so we've talked about it before, but there's a bunch of stuff when it comes to the stolen valor aspect of Tim Walz.
Governor Walz, the country is just starting to get to know you. I want to ask you a question about how you've described your service in the National Guard. You said that you carried weapons in war, but you have never deployed actually in a war zone. A campaign official said that you misspoke. Did you?
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly proud. I've done 24 years of wearing the uniform of this country. Equally proud of my service in a public school classroom, whether it's Congress or the governor. My record speaks for itself, but I think people are coming to get to know me. I speak like they do. I speak candidly. I wear my emotions on my sleeves, and I speak especially passionately about our children being shot in schools and around guns. So I think people know me. They know who I am. They know where my heart is. And again, my record has been out there for over 40 years to speak for itself.
And the idea that you said that you were in war, did you misspeak as the campaign has said?
Yeah, I said we were talking about, in this case, this was after a school shooting, the ideas of carrying these weapons of war. And my wife, the English teacher, told me my grammar is not always correct. But again, if it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack on my dog. I'm not going to do that. And the one thing I'll never do is I'll never demean another member's service in any way. I never have, and I never will.
What?
So apparently it was a grammar mistake, according to his wife.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
So it's a weird one that he blames his wife. Said what?
Like, my wife, who's the English teacher, says I don't always have the best grammar. So okay, so yeah, you confuse.
I speak like the normal people,
Oh,
so I
but-
speak
but
wrong.
within.
But there's also things like saying he went to Iraq when he actually went to Italy. You know, like there's also those types of things that aren't addressed here. And this was a very clear pivot, right?
Yeah, he started talking about school shootings, and it's just like a total deflection.
Well, I mean, yeah, not a very skillful one, but I mean, obviously, like, tactical in the sense that, hey, like, let's pivot this to something that people feel very emotionally about. They can kind of distract them in this moment.
Well,
David,
it's
what do you
also
always say? Answer the question you want it to be asked, not the one you were asked.
Yep.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, it's it's exactly that. I lost what I was going to say.
I really
but
wish you
it's
would talk about
exactly
how
that.
great I am. You know how great I am?
Yeah, David was
I'm
just
really
right.
great.
David was right. Well, you know, he answered with like, the American people know what's in my heart. Well, like, no, the problem is we don't know what's in your heart, and that's why we're trying to get to the bottom of the question, because none of us really know who you are except for Minnesotans, and all the Minnesotans seem to think that you're weird, right?
Well, and the suspicion of the veteran community, as I understand it, is that he is stealing the valor of people who did serve in a combat zone by saying, I am an expert in whether or not these weapons should be available to everyday people, and they shouldn't be, because I'm an expert and I carried it in war, when you actually didn't do that.
Right.
Right. And that's obviously the point he's making. And the fact, once again, that Dana Bash does not push back.
It's Dana.
And actually make him address the core of our issue, which she would have if it was Vivek Ramaswamy.
Oh, for sure. Well, and this leaves aside the point that military rifles are different. They're much more, you know, you have
Same
burst
thing.
fire modes and automatic.
They're scary, Joe. That's all that
abilities
matters.
that you don't have buying as a civilian. You
Yeah.
just don't have the same capabilities. You cannot buy that.
Not understanding the difference between a semi-automatic and a fully automatic weapon is a trademark of being a Democrat. Like,
Absolutely.
you don't have to know anything to have that opinion.
That's right.
You can completely confuse it, And that's okay. And no one's going to call you out on that.
You know what? If you don't have a uterus, you can't talk about abortion. Well, if you don't own an AR-15, you can't talk about rifles. New rule established right here.
That was pretty good.
I got one last thing from here that I think that we can riff on, and it is Kamala was asked about her first thought when she was told that she got the nod for the presidency. And I think that this is just fun.
And did he offer to endorse you right away, or did you ask for it?
It was a Sunday, so
It was a Sunday.
here I'll give you a little too much information.
Yeah,
Go
See,
for
far,
it.
far
There's
away.
no such thing, Madam Vice President.
My family was staying with us, and including my baby nieces,
Time filler.
and we had just
Size
had
30 font.
Paint the picture.
pancakes and, Auntie, can I have more bacon? Yes, I'll make you more bacon. And then we were sitting down to do a puzzle. And
Tear
the
it up,
phone
you
rang,
guys.
and it was Joe Biden. And he told me what he had decided to do. And I asked him, "Are you sure?" And he said yes. And but
You've been
that's
married ever
how I
since?
learned about it.
And what about the endorsement? Did you ask for it?
And he was very clear that he was going to support me.
So when he called to tell you, he said, I'm pulling out of the race and I'm going to support you.
Well, my first thought was not about me, to be honest with you. My first thought was about him, to be honest.
To be honest.
Twice.
I'm honest.
My first thought was not about me. The one that's going to be running for president and something that I was really aiming for. It was about him.
He calls me and he says, Kamala, I'm working on this tweet. Can you help me craft it? Just look it over.
Just look it over.
Sign
I'm
it
not going to
too.
make a statement. I'm just doing this tweet. Help me out.
I'm sure the first thought was about him. I'm sure about it was. Maybe the first thought was, finally, I'm done with the senile old kook, and now it's my turn. Maybe that's what the thought was.
Maybe that was it. About damn time, Joe.
I like the. He made it very clear he was going to endorse me as I hold the gun to his head.
Well, and that's the more accurate one because, according to Seymour Hersh, who reports that she, along with the leader in the Senate for the Democrats and Nancy Pelosi, went to Joe Biden and said, hey, if you don't drop out, we're going to use the 25th Amendment. Kamala is on board. So if she did that
so
on
Obama,
Friday...
too.
Yeah, Obama as well was one of those people. She did that on Thursday or Friday, and then come Sunday, she gets this nice call, right? Like, think about that for a minute. It's like she's now framing it as like, oh, I was so out of the blue. I was so surprised by it. I was just having pancakes,
brunch,
doing a puzzle, and it's like, no, you spent the week threatening to throw him out of the presidency with other Democratic elites.
It's like a girlfriend turning to her boyfriend and saying, like, when are you going to propose? And then when you find it, she's like, it was just so like out of the blue and unexpected.
That's exactly how this feels.
Exactly it.
That's exactly how this feels.
Would you just participate in her delusion with her, please, Joe? Like, go with your reality.
I am right here with her.
Oh,
Fully on board.
That's an analogy. Holy cow. That's just good, man. Well done.
I may not have lived
but
that reality.
that kind of showcases there's more things from it. They really, I think, stretched out a lot of things, making it seem like it was much longer than it was, but everything was very pretty quick answers in this regard. But that is kind of how it looked over the course of it. That's pretty much
just a lot of unnecessary details.
Turns out in watching these
We're
4
having
clips,
pancakes.
Auntie, can I have more bacon?
I really love puzzles. It's like Venn diagrams for me.
you guys realize we watched about 85% of the interview, just these 5
pretty much.
clips.
That is true.
Yeah.
Well, I did have more in the notes that we'll skip over those ones. I think everybody gets the point. But yeah, with everything, that was probably the entire thing. Yeah.
So over under, how many more interviews is Kamala going to do before election day?
I'd give her one more.
One more.
Yeah. Plus the debate.
I mean, yeah, it's 2 months away from yesterday.
So the debate, if it's 2 hours, the debate's
votes start in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
I think, didn't North Carolina get their stuff sent this week?
Crazy.
Some military ballots go out in September in some states.
Yeah, so it's like some have started.
Yeah. Voting will start the first week of
So
October.
this may be the only interview some people see before they cast a vote.
Yep.
And they get less
Holy
than
crap.
17 minutes of her actually speaking.
Well,
and one
to
debate.
be fair, the debate, if it's 2 hours, will be like 7 of these. So that's quite a bit of time for her.
It'll be very interesting to see what the polling does or the prediction markets do after the debate.
So
I'm so curious about the debate.
I actually have been developing a thought about the campaign strategy from the Democrats' point of view and why they're doing everything they're doing. Do you guys want to hear it?
Yes.
Okay. So my theory is they see the American people like racist, sexists who need to be manipulated into electing the first black woman as president. Right?
Yeah.
So working backwards from that thesis of their inner psychology, how they see the American electorate, what I suspect is that the reason why they keep the policy positions as vague as possible for as long as they can before they actually get called out to the degree that they have to reveal stuff out, and then now they're kind of doing that a little bit. And the reason why they delayed interviews is specifically because they want to set the standard of who she was as not a policy wonk, because that's what Hillary was, right? Hillary was a policy person, a serious diplomat, and a serious person. And that's not what the American people want. They want someone that they can trust and know and like, right?
Kamala's brat girl summer.
Bro, you took the words right out of my mouth.
And so
she doesn't care about policy that much.
The classic example of that is Mitt Romney versus Barack Obama. Who would make a better president? Mitt Romney. Who would rather run your business? Mitt Romney. Who would you rather have watch your kids? Barack Obama. Who would you rather get a beer with? Barack Obama. Those sorts of things, right?
But who would you rather have a hot dog with?
Guy loves hot dogs. And he was
my favorite meat.
It's like the only thing you associate Mitt Romney with is hot dogs. I love that.
It's the only thing I associate with him.
He was the governor. He was my governor for a while. He was the Massachusetts governor.
Before he went to Utah with the Mormons. That's right.
Yes.
So, so what I suspect is a lot of this is partly to cover for her campaign weaknesses, right? Interviews and extemporaneous speaking, as opposed to pre-canned speeches, and obviously being able to do paid media ads. But it's also because I think that's what they think of the American people. We can't let her out because the American people might see her and realize that, or it might, and will not vote for her because she's dark-skinned and because she's a woman. So we have to keep her out of the view as much as we can.
Because that psychologically embeds, and then people will have their discriminatory votes if they see her too much.
That's another reason to put Tim Walz right next to her in this interview, because then
don't worry, the white guy is helping it out.
That's how. Right, now you say that and you think like it sounds like I'm the racist for that, but that's how they see this.
No,
they think you're that way.
I've seen Democrats on Twitter make this point.
Yes, we have to do this for the rubes.
Yeah.
We have to make sure there's a white established guy, wasp-looking dude, close to her, because the rubes are so dumb they won't vote for her based upon any actual rational reason. They'll only do it based upon demographics because that's how they see.
I have seen Democratic operative types on Twitter make this point. It's not crazy. Like it's not they do think that the American people are this way, and so you have to trick the American electorate in order to, and so in order for us to have this historic moment, you know.
Yep.
And when you say trick the American electorate, I mean, really, it comes down to like the swing voters, right? Like, because obviously the partisan Democrats are going to vote for this ticket.
Yep.
Regardless, they would vote
and the partisan Republicans the opposite way.
Yeah. Right. So it's the people in the middle that they really need.
Who might not be paying much attention. We're just like, that would be nice to represent my country. The big orange man sometimes embarrasses us, so we need to have this new thing. But then they're like, oh, but Kamala, I don't know if we're ready for that. You know, like, and then there's going to be that type of stuff, because like those surface level things are actually what drive the public at large, because not everybody's paying attention to us like the same way that, or paying attention to these things the same way that we pay attention to these things. Yeah. Where we're kind of like, well, their policy positions, no, it's not the way the average person looks at it.
So are you saying you agree with that strategy? You have to.
I think that is I think that Dave's right, that is probably one of the things that is in the mind on the strategic end.
Yeah.
Right.
And whether or not it's valid, right? You think about, is that actually, I don't think the American people are as racist as the Democrats think they are.
Oh, certainly.
Right? I think if she was as talented a communicator as Barack Obama, she'd be crushing it right now. She'd be doing great.
Yeah.
Right? Because she could speak extemporaneously. She could motivate crowds. She would have a positive vision that wasn't vague and ridiculous like a campaign for joy. Right? I mean, like,
Obama is actually it disproves the idea in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Where the American public was like, there is this historic moment we're having, and look there's this eloquent dark-skinned man and just like he's just like the rest of us, like that's kind of the way that everybody had. Like I know Republicans who voted for Obama because of the historic moment.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
I get that.
So I think,
or like Biden said, he's just as articulate as the rest of us. Like, wasn't there a Biden quote like that?
Oh yeah,
Yikes.
yeah,
Joe Biden.
Yeah, but in reality, a lot of people is just like the policy decisions. She's not actually that likable, and there's a lot of fabrication, kind of astroturfing that is going around her likability, and that's actually people feel kind of weird about that, but. Not everybody, but that's even just like even the quasi tuned in people, but like the people that are completely not tuned in.
Yeah.
You got to kind of trick them. That's the way that the views
You have to
are.
lead them.
You have to lead them.
Yes.
Correctly.
or manipulate them.
Let's go into speaking of leading the American electorate. Why is Russia funding all of your favorite influencers?
So you get that impression from the headlines, and the headlines are very interesting in this because a bunch of stuff happened all with indictment and an affidavit, and a lot of news stories kind of meshed them all together, and that Russia's trying to interfere in the American election. For sensible, we're going to put them all in one story too, but I'm going to try to break them out so you can actually clear what the hell's going on.
Yeah,
because a lot of it's very unclear from the coverage.
So what exactly happened?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to break it into 3 different stories. One, a bunch of Russian-tied URLs were killed off by the FBI.
Okay.
Right? As like fake media site.
Tribunalukraine.info, rrn.media, 50 states of lie.media. There's like a bunch of these random URLs. Honeymoney.press.
That happened. There was what I call the Tenet story, which has specifically to do with your favorite podcasters maybe be Russian spies. And then a third one was the Treasury came out after Sputnik Newswire and some other things that are related with that with the Treasury. So the DOJ and the Treasury did 2 different things. The DOJ did 2 things. Treasury did 1 thing. So let's start with the DOJ and what they did. So the first one is that there was a bunch of these Russian media sites. I have the affidavit linked if you want to jump into it, Kyle. And go to page 91 to start out. What they did is they said the Russians are trying to control our election. So they created a whole bunch of fake media sites to confuse the American people. And I kind of broke it out to like some of these are I could see confusing, right? You might click on a link and see this and say, oh, that looks like the Washington Post. Go up a little bit, Kyle, so you can see the top headliner. Yeah.
World. Yeah. Okay. So that's not the Washington Post. That's fake.
Yeah, it's a fake, and that's a fake website and a fake page specifically. Like now, one of the interesting things here is they actually use copyright law to go after these and take down these websites, right? Because it's a violation of Washington Post copyright.
Yeah.
Wait, it's kind of we talked about something similar in the skiff where they were using fake things on Google ads and stuff like that, like the Kamala camp.
Yeah, Kamala.
Yeah, they could change sponsored ads and.
It's just similar. It's not the same thing, but it is a similar dynamic.
Yeah, they were rewriting headlines using the masthead of like the Guardian or WAPO or whatever.
So they were using the name of things and making it look like it was associated with the ad.
Wait, the Kamala campaign was doing that?
Yes.
Yeah.
This was while you were gone.
Yeah.
Wow.
We covered it in a skiff episode.
Fake news is cool if you're running a presidential campaign. Anyway, so U.S. Sacrifices control over artificial intelligence for ideology, right? It's basically talking about woke AI. It's interesting that they would use this as the example, right? Because it's critical of the Biden regime and their like regulations on AI, right? The Eric Garland said, quote, "The American people are entitled to know when a foreign power is attempting to exploit our country's free exchange of ideas in order to send around its own propaganda." This is the propaganda they're worried about. Go ahead and go down a little bit, Kyle. Some more evidence in this case. This is the Washington Post. This is one of the more reasonable, like could confuse us. WashingtonPost.pm, right? So you just might miss that it was not a .com, right? Revelations of the head of Ukraine. Revelations of the head of Ukraine. See, these titles are hard to read, not because I'm an idiot, but because they're not well written.
Because they're written by Russians.
Yeah, right. But
looks like WAPO to me.
Yeah. So some and here's some of the criticisms of this. Like you keep going down, Kyle. There's more. Some of the criticisms was like, well, is someone you don't recognize what the URL is and how dumb these are? I get it. You know, like I can see, I've clicked on a link and be like, wait a minute, what is this? Right? After I've seen something weird, but a lot of people are confused, right? Could get confused by this. The Middle East coalition of U.S. allies crumbles like a house of cards. That could be a Washington Post headline, right? So someone might look at this, and this is what was taken around. Now, this is the best case scenario. Some of the other ones are actually kind of hilariously bad, like mypride.press or let me see here, honeymoney.press. That was like some of the websites they took down. If you go to page 30, Kyle.
Yep.
Some of the ones like the other kind of pushback on this was like, oh, this is just ideological, right? This is really to keep the Biden administration from being criticized from things that might be associated by the Russians. Like, so if you go to, and I want to read this out, the SDA records show that stated in the fall of 2003, SDA began developing a campaign targeting the 2004 U.S. federal election, which it called the Good Old USA Project. And that's Exhibit A was what we're looking at. According to the planning document, the project's goal was to influence U.S. public opinion to align with the viewpoint that, quote, the U.S. should target their efforts towards addressing domestic issues instead of wasting money in Ukraine and other problem regions.
So basically, they're targeting the idea that America should spend its money here and not overseas.
Yeah, like, and
as
that's
propaganda.
And that's part of like what's weird about this.
That's what we've been saying.
Yeah, it's a sensible policy position that the Russians were creating fake media sites to try to encourage their U.S. electorate to consider.
Interesting.
Right, which is a reasonable policy position.
So
it's actually kind of funny. This goes towards what we're going to talk about with the dynamic with Daryl Cooper with the talking about Churchill stuff. But one of the points that he made was that Hitler airdropped a bunch of leaflets into Great Britain in order to try to divert a war from happening, being like, hey, we don't want to go to war. We think a good British Empire, like a strong British Empire is a good, and we don't think that you should weaken yourselves with war.
Important against the USSR specifically.
Yeah, which is kind of funny. Like it's a similar dynamic here, but now we just have the internet. So we're not airdropping leaflets. We're
creating fake
media sites to try to do that type of stuff.
So
to deter war and things like that.
Is the left going to make the argument that anyone who is now America First is a Russian agent?
Yes, already has.
Okay, cool.
Already is. Right, and they have been. They already were.
So Vivek, Trump. Well, they already did Trump.
Tucker,
and every influencer.
Yeah.
Us.
It's just a matter of time, but that's the that's how the bad faith leftists are going to take it, right? They're going to say, "Oh, you guys are all just Russian." As this is example, now that's post hoc ergo propter hoc. It's it's modus ponens. It actually reverses around the causation, but that
was a bunch of logic jargon.
Sorry. It reverses the logic, right? We don't start from here and then go to therefore I'm a Russian agent, therefore I believe this. This is actually saying Russian agents just happen to be seeing what the American people are in dialogue with, and then copying the things that are best for their foreign policy, which is not to go to war with NATO.
Yeah.
It just so happens a war between Russia and America would also be bad for America.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
already is.
And then a lot of this is kind of the coverage is blown out of proportion. Not only do we have ukrlm.info, that's one of the fake media sites that was going to manipulate lots of people, apparently.
Sounds legit.
The real question is, what was the actual scale of impact? Was this a real threat, or is this something that the DOJ is spiking as look how awesome we are and look how we saved democracy, right? And like one of this, if we go to page 31, is a media page.
It's sort of similar in the same vein, the Russia bot story. Like how much of an impact actually was it? Was it happening versus how much of an impact actually happened, right?
Yeah. And the question is like, are they actually affecting this? So if you go to page 31.
I am there.
What?
31.
You go down. Yeah, it's at the bottom. They shut down CNN California that had 7 followers.
7.
Crushed it.
This is how you say democracy, guys.
BBC California.
Yeah. 2 likes. 2. Wow. And this is their evidence of their great work they did to save democracy. Now, don't get me wrong. I do think that there might be a role in shutting down fake media sites in order to protect American democracy. Maybe you can make that case that that's a just role of the U.S. federal government, or at least to flag these sorts of things for domain hosts or something like that, because it's not real, right? Yeah. It's an act by a government. And their evidence that they have within the affidavit, of which I read a lot of until it got into like the minutia, it does seem substantial. Like they have IP addresses, they have like reasons to believe why these are Russian-controlled sites. It's not completely out of the blue, right? Unlike the Tenet story, which is more complicated, and even less so for the Sputnik story.
Well, it's probably worth mentioning too. that all nations are probably doing this on a various spectrum to each other, probably, right? Like our entire foreign policy, is managing other people's domestic policies, right?
Yes. And
by manipulating their elections and trying to install the correct people.
No, the U.S. government would never do that. They would never do that.
We're the good guys.
That's
all
right.
the time.
That's right.
Every time.
White hats.
Only the good guys have won ever.
It's a Marvel comic.
The great Norm Macdonald quote.
And so some of this was done through shell companies in the U.S. to buy advertising in the U.S. And that's an interesting component of this, like the flow of Russian money into like just how perforous that can be. And we'll get into that in the Tenet story some more. But the part of this is like an out of proportion claim again. There's no real evidence of substantial influence by these websites. They don't actually tell you how much traffic. Maybe they couldn't measure that. I don't know. But it isn't really known how broadly this was. And the evidence we do have shows it's kind of hacky and not very persuasive and probably has a minimal impact despite the money that they invested into it by the Russians.
Yeah.
The next one is the Tenet story. And this is kind of confusing for a couple of reasons, but at least one of them is telling the story of Lauren Chin, who is, you might know as the roaming millennial, is what her kind of YouTube name was.
Yeah, she's been on Timcast a bunch, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
she works for the Blaze too, I believe.
Yeah, and was she a Yao girl at some point or something like that? She might precede a lot of that
She's
crew.
in that like libertarian conservative milieu.
Yeah. And she got popular on YouTube and then kind of branched into opinion column writing and Timcast and the Blaze. She's an employee at the Blaze until now. She got fired for this story.
Oh, wow.
Oh, did she get fired for this?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
All right. So basically she gets popular, becomes an influencer, has a pretty substantial media following. I'd say not on par with Candace Owens, but close, right?
Yeah.
2001, she started with her husband a new kind of media aggregator website called Tenet Media. Tenet, like the movie,
Tenet.
Yeah, like the movie about everyone's going backwards in time.
Yeah, the Christopher Nolan.
Yeah.
Also, 2001 or 21?
2021.
Okay.
Yeah. Did I say 2001?
Yeah.
Yeah, and earlier you said 2004.
She was like,
she'd have been a kid, like
yeah,
a baby.
Should have been like 10.
So she does that in 2021. Sorry, she is also writes some opinions for Russian TV, right? RT. This is before the invasion of the Ukraine, not long before, but and that's what's still on the website. RT has featured lots of conservative and libertarian opinion, going all the way back to like, remember Adam Kokesh had a show on RT?
Yeah.
And like things like that. Ron Paul's been featured on RT a ton of times, right? And this is just like the way people in her role as an influencer and as an opinion maker, and this is how I would orientate to it, is you put what you want out, you're trying to get a message out, and then some people accept it. Like the Daily Wire says, hey, we'll run that, or Rebel Media does, or Prager, or sometimes the Washington Post or the New York Times or RT would put that out. And a lot of people who are more, agnostic on Russia and don't see it as a devil are going to say, yeah, you want to run my piece? Thank you.
Somebody is putting my voice out there. So you have an incentive to just be like, okay, sure.
They're featuring
maybe
you.
they're trying to use you as propaganda. There's probably like intel influence that's going into there, but it's also like you're trying to boost your own thing, and it's not necessarily this like
that's the media game.
But it's the same thing. Like if you go on the corporate media in America, you are largely being used as a mouthpiece for something. Like these platforms want to put you on for something,
yes,
right?
Because they agree with your ideas.
Yeah.
If they're agreeing with you, it doesn't mean you agree with all of their ideas, right? So just because Lauren Chen was featured on RT doesn't mean she has a big beef with, Chechnya, right? It means they liked her ideas about these things. If you go down, like her articles on this are like standard.
Yeah. If you're American and oppose war with Russia, expect to be smeared as unpatriotic.
Yeah,
it was something we would say.
Yeah.
How girl power played its part in Elizabeth Holmes' downfall.
Yeah, one of her things is she talks about gender politics a lot. That's one of the and race and stuff like that. She's Asian American.
She's also like super
Christian
Christian too, so there's a lot of Christian dialogue that exists.
Yeah.
Yep.
So attacking Barry Weiss.
She has been very
arguing against vaccine passports.
Yeah, and one of the things to know about the Chen is that she's one of the people who backed the more Tucker and Candace Owens side of the Israeli-Palestine conflict.
She hosted Dave Smith on her show to help
take
with that
that
stuff.
for what you will. That is no evidence that that's directly coordinated with any of this, but it is interesting that that's one of the people who got taken down in this.
She was she was the person that hosted that Christ is King Twitter space as well.
That got really
when
big.
that type of dialogue was happening, which was very much involved with the Israel talk.
Okay.
Like that's like a side piece to that story.
Right.
Clearly a anti-Semitic Nazi sympathizer.
Clearly.
So in November of 2023, she starts Tenet Media. Bunch of other right-wing influencers get brought on alongside of her, right? People who have similar size following. Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, Dave Rubin, Lauren Southern, people like that.
A lot
of
major influencers in the conservative media space, like dissident conservative media space too.
Yeah, so their stated mission was, quote, "Our goal is to support creators who question institutions that believe themselves to be above questioning. In our view, all issues du jour merit rigorous and honest discussion if one wants to come closest to the truth. For those interested in authentic coverage of the topics that matter most, Tenet Media is your home for content. Fearless voices live here." Had about 40,000 Twitter followers. I don't know how big their YouTube was because it got taken down when this report came out, or this indictment came out, and it, but it had substance and scale, but not larger than any of the people at hand, right? Like all the people at hand, Dave Rubin, 2 million followers, Benny Johnson, 2 million followers, right? Matt Christensen, people like that, 500,000 to 1 million.
Do you know
followers.
he's from Bozeman?
Matt Christensen? No, I didn't know that. Wow. Crazy.
So Tim Pool's involved in this.
Yep.
And yeah, he's again a really, really huge YouTube channel, like 1 million plus, maybe 2.
Yeah. So what happened is the indictment this week says that after the invasion of Russia, Russia Today ceased distribution.
There's this idea.
Sorry, I was just pulling up his
Tim
page.
Pool just jumping in my ears. That was creepy.
It's got about 1.4 million, yeah.
Yeah. So after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, Russia Today and other Russian media outlets were banned in the United States, right? You can still find RT on places on the internet. I don't want the DOJ to come after us for talking about it.
VPN.
They exist on the internet.
But what it claims
just a blanket
is
statement.
RT then shifted its mission. RT still exists, it still produces, but it added to its mission, rather, is probably more accurate, honestly. But they claim shifted its mission to a, quote, entire empire of covert projects, end quote, designed to shape public opinion in the Western world.
This is the DOJ's assessment of what RT does?
Yes, okay. Right. And that's their accusation. So accusations are 4-part accusations that I broke out of a very long indictment. So forgive me. 1, 2 RT employees are accused of deploying $10 million of laundered money through shell companies to covertly fund and direct Tenet Media to edit, post certain videos. Right. So if you go to Tenet Media's YouTube page, it would have had a bunch of videos from these makers, right, that they hosted on Tenet. 2, Tenet Company gave posting and editing rights to one of the Russians, right? So like Lauren Chin didn't just like receive this money. They also took one of those Russians, and they have them, they're named, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
These are former RT employees who she probably met while as a guest column with them, or they reached out. They don't really document how the initial connection happened. But they had this relationship mostly by Discord. And Lauren gave them actually rights to, like editing rights to the Tenet website and to the YouTube page to like post.
Probably because this Russian is like a CIA asset.
3, the RT people, Lauren Chin and her husband, are accused of deceiving 2 online commentators, probably are Benny Johnson and Tim Pool, of lying to them about the origin of the money. Right, so they're accused of deceiving Tim Pool and Benny Johnson about where the money comes from.
And I also have a clip from Tim Pool where he talks about it on his show.
Well, yeah, we'll get to the reactions in a second. And then 4, the RT people provided a fake persona, actually a bunch of fake personas, but one of them was Edward Gregorian as like a fake person. And if you look at the indictment, they actually have like this like cheesy like profile for Edward Gregorian that they used to try to. What's not clear is to a degree it actually was a manipulation of Lauren Chin, and she actually knew what was going on, or if it was the other people. Now, I think most of the indictments accusation that they knew is actually circumstantial. For example, they used Lauren Chin saying, hey, we need to get this invoice from the Russians, as the idea that she was talking about the Russian state, but she also going to talk about the 2 Russian people,
right,
who have difficult to pronounce names, so therefore she just shortened it as the Russians. This is Edward Gregorian. Yeah.
So this guy's not real?
Yeah, that guy doesn't exist.
Interesting.
Yeah, read the description. It's pretty funny.
Experienced finance professional and investor, deeply engaged in business and philanthropy, leveraging skills and resources to drive positive impact, supporting a range of organizations worldwide with a dynamic presence, mainly in Brussels and London, engaging in personal and professional pursuits in each location with a focus of poverty alleviation, championing free speech, and advocating for social justice causes.
Mm-hmm. So like that's like platitudes and nothing, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so the question is whether or not Lauren thought he was a real person and this person just employed to them, or if she knew that this was actually a fake person. Now, there is some circumstantial evidence to suggest that she knew, right?
That it was fake.
Yeah, that was fake, that this money was actually from Russia, right? But they use things like her saying, working for a Russian company like RT, saying to someone else in a text message has its cost because there are some people in the United States who won't trust you because you're writing an opinion column on RT. She experienced that before any of these deals. She wrote for RT, right? But they use that as evidence that she knew that the Russians were actually behind it all, or that the Russian government was, as opposed to a Russian individuals or a Russian financier who's actually, according to this, from Brussels, from Belgium, not from Russia. But what's funny is that it would still actually be legal under the Foreign Actor Act, or under the foreign registration that they're actually prosecuting these two Russians on.
It would be legal?
Illegal.
Illegal.
Yeah. So the actual what's the word? Finding of like, let me see here. Let me look this up real quick so I can get this right.
Bennett cut this out.
Oh yeah. The actual illegality is not registering as an agent of a foreign principal as required by law in moving money. So if you move money in the United States and pay somebody with it, you're supposed to register very specifically as a transmitter of foreign money into the United States.
Well, it's a similar thing.
The federal
it's
government.
a similar thing with like the Biden family, where there's a lot of questions about the foreign agent stuff.
It's worse for the Biden family because he had direct relationship with an actual policymaker. These are just people paying people to host their opinion on a website. Right?
And this is a question because like spy games get weird, right? Everything gets muddy. Everything's under the radar. Everything's all this stuff. So like the biggest question is how privy was Lauren to things? Like how much did she know what was going on? And a lot of the things that I'm saying initially suggest to me that she didn't.
That's not how it was covered, though. I mean, the way the CBS News, the way even like Breaking Points and like outlets I really like talked about it was as if Lauren was in on it. And when you read the indictment,
doesn't seem to be
if you read it with any amount of charity towards Lauren, you're like, I don't know. I mean, it's possible, but it isn't here. There's no smoking gun evidence that I could see. There's circumstantial evidence that could be explained in alternative ways. So this indictment doesn't go after her. Future indictments might. It really goes after and focuses on the two Russian people who are former RT employees, not Lauren Chen. And it basically says any remaining money, it goes away. Now, what happens to the money that she distributed? And it's like real money, $10 million. It was paying Tim Pool probably, or Benny Johnson, I'm not sure which, $1 million a year just to host their 8-minute video on their website.
Crazy.
Yeah, for one video a month, $1 million.
Wow.
Yeah. Real money. So
Russia.
Are these rubles or are these?
That's a joke. We would never do that. Now, one of the things that one of my criticisms of some of our fellow podcasters in this space was all the people who go like, I would never do that. You can trust me. You know, like they would like really took this opportunity to just like dance on Lauren and these people. And even like the left obviously took advantage of this. Said Tim Pool's a Russian agent. I always knew it, right? When what Tim happened is he's actually, and he's not wrong about this. If you go to his reaction, he's not wrong. His justification is exactly right from my reading of the indictment and how he defends himself here.
I guess this is Tim Week in the news because I'm just in the news all the time. Now, admittedly, it wasn't my fault that the Harris campaign accused me of calling for what is tantamount to a genocide of Democrats. That's a lie, by the way. And we are currently in the process of drafting our formal complaint. We will be filing a lawsuit. But now news broke. The DOJ said that there's this RT employees were covertly funding a U.S. company publishing thousands of videos in furtherance of Russian interests. And it is presumed that company is Tenet Media. For those who aren't familiar, this is a new media company. And we license one of our shows, Culture War, to them. And now I'm getting hit up by like everybody in the media. They're emailing me and they're tweeting at me and sending me DMs being like, what's going on with this? Well, I'll make clear immediately in the start of the show. Did you read the indictment? It clearly says that I, as well as the other personalities, were victims. We were deceived by people intentionally to trick us into licensing our content to them. I will add, I have a statement about this, which, we'll launch the full segment, but we never produced anything for them. We had an existing show that was already in production that they licensed distribution for, which meant that the show that we already produced appeared on their network. That was the gist of the deal. So there's no one from their company involved with ours. Their company paid a license fee to broadcast a show that we produce, that we run, that our employees are involved with, and they have nothing to do with. I don't know what, politically, you're going to see a bunch of Democrats making claims and all this other stuff. I can't speak for anybody else involved with the company because I don't know what they do or what their jobs are or anything like that. I can just tell you plainly, culture war existed well before the license agreement. It will exist well after the license agreement, and they license it for a set period, and that meant that the show appeared on their channel. That's it. Like any other show appearing on any other network, we produce it on our own. So we'll talk about that. And
yeah. Well, there's also a dynamic here too, where it makes sense for the foreign policy spy games to platform and try to elevate the platform of people that might be, because like a lot of these people here, a lot of them are pretty outspoken against the war in Ukraine, and Russia has a pretty invested interest in trying to make it so that American involvement doesn't continue to heighten in the war in Ukraine. So if you can get the people to kind of have that message, and to us, that's actually kind of a good message. Like, we don't want to heighten the war in Ukraine because we don't want to go into nuclear war, right?
Yeah, right.
So like there is a sense there of, even if this, like, there's a manipulation game that's happening here, there is kind of that dynamic of they don't want that heightening to happen.
Right. And that doesn't justify Chen's actions if she knew that these guys were Russian oligarchs or, tied to a Russian oligarch or Russian state money, right?
Yeah.
Or
I'm
even
more
that
so
they're
just
RT.
looking at like the broader game theory of spy games.
Exactly.
Right?
And if this was the U.S. government during the Arab Spring, specifically using algorithms and the internet and their control over tech institutions internationally to encourage an overthrow of Mubarak in Egypt, we would all be like, oh, well, spy games.
Yeah.
But because it's like moving money into the United States,
yeah.
we're not seeing it as it's not being covered as a spy game, right? Yeah. It's being seen as Lauren Chen was a Russian spy, right? As opposed to somebody who's manipulated and or as a part of a phenomena of governments trying to interrupt each other's domestic policy in order to advance their foreign policy.
And there's a broader point. Like I brought up the point many, many months ago about the idea of assets versus agents when it comes to spy games.
Right.
Of a lot of people are kind of unknowingly assets in broader spy games that they don't understand. And it's often unknowing. And often it's usually influencer, personality, political commentator types. And it's also, I think we put that in when we were talking about the conspiracy of Taylor Swift being an asset for the use of various schemes. But we were also talking about things like jazz diplomacy, where the CIA was funding a jazz artist to go and spread the good word of the good gospel of American democracy in Africa, right? Which is a thing that we know happened, and it was a program that existed, right? But you have a lot of artists or influencers, they don't necessarily, like, they're getting these funding from front groups that are part of intel agencies, and they don't necessarily know the bigger picture that's happening, but they're just like, oh, we got a cool financier that wants to help us with this thing because they believe in our cause and all this stuff, right? That type of stuff.
And it's one of those things, like, a lot of this is this guy and these people moving money to amplify these voices, right? They don't, now don't get me wrong, I do think as a media personality, as a podcast, that we should carefully vet where our money comes from so that we don't find ourselves getting pressure from somebody to editorialize in a certain direction. And we know that these two people definitely put pressure on Chen to editorialize in a certain direction. And it's I'll give you an example of that because I think we actually covered this story too. Do you remember the music concert hall attack in Russia?
Yes.
Yeah. So we covered it as ISIS claims this is a thing. That said, the U.S. government has had a strange relationship with ISIS for some time, as has perhaps Israel, had a relationship with ISIS and some elements of the ISIS as a coalition, as an international thing, etc. Now, what happened with those people? Now, they had a very suspicious set of circumstances that we pointed to say they might have been, meant to look like ISIS. Maybe ISIS was put up as a scapegoat, but actually funded somehow through a spy game by Western powers. It's possible, but we don't know. Lauren covered it kind of the same way. And so they used that in the indictment as evidence that obviously ISIS took responsibility for it, so therefore it couldn't possibly have been Western forces, right? That's evidence now in the indictment for her being a Russian agent, functionally, or at least on like taking orders from these people. When the discussion, as it's in the actual evidence, suggested them just saying, well, I mean, look, here's the evidence that they were on their way to the Ukrainian border. They were paid money to do this. That's not usual for ISIS fighters. They didn't commit suicide in their act. All these kind of things that are common for ISIS fighters. So therefore, maybe it wasn't. Lauren didn't cover it. I know it was Ukraine. She covered it as they could be Ukraine. We don't know, right? So what was it? Are they taking orders from the Russians here, or are they just taking money? Right.
Well, and it's a similar thing. Like we'd point out the same type of stuff with the Israel conflict. The amount of money that goes into media that comes from is like Israeli billionaire funding, and if you don't think that there's like ties that exist there, like right.
Well,
but it's the same type of thing where like a lot of the influencers that themselves, like they already naturally fall into the category of being a little bit more pro-Zionist or whatever. So they're taking money with people that conformed, like that have their beliefs. There's not even necessarily, it doesn't even necessarily have to be like, hey, we're going to editorialize everything you do now. It's just like, no, these people see this as a useful ally and we're going to help elevate them. And there might be black budget, there might be like CIA, Mossad, whatever name the intelligence agency or whoever has a vested interest in promoting that tool. And it could be like this person has a reason for promoting this idea and this person has a different reason for promoting this idea, but they both want the same idea being promoted, right?
Right.
Like this is just like take the morality out of it, these are the types of games that are played at this level, right?
Right. And we know that when it comes to a non-registered foreign agent that some people argue should be registered, American Israeli PAC.
Yes.
Right. So
and demonetized.
But there could be others, right? And we don't know, right? I mean, Daily Wire was founded in Israel. This is known.
Oh, was it really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Primary sponsors are big, like Israeli billionaires.
Yeah, Zionists, stuff like that. And that's not saying that necessarily they're, took money from them. I don't know. But these are coincidences that happen, right?
National Review back in the day was funded largely by, or it appears, if you read Murray Rothbard's book, The Betrayal of the American Right, it appears to be largely funded CIA ties.
Yeah.
So like it becomes a CIA front group.
And we know, for example, CIA operations and Project Mockingbird, things like that meant our own government's influence on our media, right? So it's just, when you step back and look at the larger picture, you're seeing this game being played. You're seeing all this stuff. Pharma advertising on TV. Yeah. Does that compromise the way they cover?
Certainly.
Dick pills and things like that. I don't know what they're selling. Allergy medicine.
Vaccines.
Yeah, exactly. And then of course this is being used in the overall architecture of this and the real danger of this, and obviously why podcasters, especially of our more dissident voices, angle, needs to carefully vet where money comes from, because now it's this huge ammunition that they're going to say, anytime you criticize American foreign policy, well, you're just a tool and getting funding from this. Now, we don't get any funding at all, except for from our advertisers and members.
And our members, we need to vet our members and make sure you're not Russian agents.
Isaac, I'm looking at you.
Every one of you. We need name, social security number,
credit card number as well.
Credit card number. We need all of it.
But that's one of the benefits of being member supported, right? Is you don't have to depend on advertiser dollars as much.
Yeah.
And like I don't know. And then monetization, right? We're dependent on YouTube, right? So we're going to censor ourselves. Some people censor themselves based upon what the YouTube algorithm is going to prefer. They're going to demonetize us for talking about certain things like that, right? So all these influence exist in the media game. You got to be very careful with it. Otherwise, you give your opponents major ammunition against you.
Multivariant. There's just a lot of variables that go into it, right?
And the real danger here is that this is going to be the next launcher for Russiagate 2.0, like Russiagate was, for more media censorship. That, okay, you algorithms, you can't let these like upstarts speak in your algorithm, you got to put NBC News because they have an editorial team to make sure that they're factual and all this kind of stuff, and they can't be influenced by the Russians. So that's
and one of the important things here too is, as we're going to get into with the Churchill dialogue and everything that's going into that, is this is the space where the new mythologies are going to be forming, right? So there's old mythologies and there's new mythologies, and those mythologies are the things that are being discussed right now in media space, because these are going to be the things that shape the direction of the next 100 years, is these types of conversations that are happening. Right. So, and that's why all these major, and when we're talking about the spy games, those things really matter for the long-term plans that various spy organizations have, and nation states and all of this stuff, right? Like all these things are very important. Even if it's just like, why should I care about this like influencer I've never heard but has like 200,000 followers? It's like, oh, you might want to pay attention to like what that influencer is saying, because like they are shaping the opinions and the thoughts. Like they are thought leaders. Like there's a reason why that word exists, because they're shaping the thoughts of the next generations and how they're going to lead down the road a few decades from now.
What their assumptions are, what their beliefs are.
So like just looking at things of like, well, how does this pertain to the current 4-year election cycle? Like that you're not paying, how does this pay attention? How does this matter for the nation state cycle of the next 100 years? Like that's what we're talking about.
And a part of this is the biasing towards the more established traditional media, corporate media, specifically because they're inoculated from this particular problem, right? So they're going to use that as the censorship. Now, that's not true, right? I wouldn't guess that's true, but more people are trusting podcasts all the time and trusting dissident voices. I was checking out a poll that suggested 2/3 of podcast listeners expect their podcast to be accurate or as accurate as mainstream corporate media.
Yeah.
Right? And, a lot of them will listen to comedy podcasts, right? And they expect them to be accurate, right? They're expecting honesty and integrity out of their media sources.
Well, I actually think that's more of an indictment on the corporate media than it is the right, because like you shouldn't expect 100% truth. People get things wrong. Some people are more honest than others. Some people are trying to get at the truth, but they might be wrong. And it's like they're truthful, but they might be misunderstanding something. Like there's all these different things. So you're never going to get 100%. We make mistakes, all that stuff, right? But people looking at it as like they're just as truthful as the corporate press, I think is very useful, because the corporate press has their own agendas. They have their own funders. They have their own influences and money coming in because of their advertisers, because of things like Operation Mockingbird, things like, like there's all those types of dynamics. Operation Mockingbird, obviously CIA influence of American media, right? Like all of those things. If this is the new media space where all the new narratives are being crafted, like you should treat it similar to how you view the corporate press, where like all these influences still exist, and you have to be careful with who you're talking to. And it's just now people that are outside the normal opinion that is trying to be force fed into you can exist in the podcast space, unlike the corporate press.
Right.
What impact do you think this has, or what significance is there of the timing of this 2 months out from the election? Are they going to try to censor these voices ahead of election day?
Well, look at everything that's happening with like Telegram right now. Yeah. Right?
A lot of platforms, a lot of ways of people accessing the dissident voices are being attacked right now.
Yeah. So, and what they're going to say is everybody that's still around is, well, look at all these conservatives funded by Russian media.
Mm-hmm. And anytime you can get someone to say all the conservatives are funded by Russian media, to turn off those voices, to not consider them, if you're the middle of the road person, right?
Yeah.
It's all about the maintenance and acquisition of power, right? So if that's what they're about, we could see more crackdowns. I think that's very, very, very realistic. Now, would the DOJ have standing to do that in other cases? No, right? It wouldn't be through DOJ. It'd be through how Lauren Chen got her.
Two Laurens.
Yeah.
Same tenant media.
Got her YouTube channel now removed completely, because I don't know who, but someone sent the
and by the way, I just tried to go to her channel and it is taken down.
You send the indictment to Lauren to YouTube, and YouTube said, we reviewed it and we've taken it down, right? And that itself is kind of scary, right? Because Lauren Chen could be a victim in this. She could be, according to not according to the indictment, but in the process of the trial, come out to be, no, she just thought this was a guy from Brussels, and she didn't know the law, right? She didn't have a mens rea case, right, where she wasn't aware that she needed to register as a foreign agent in order to take money from Brussels.
But in the meantime, we're going to censor her just in case.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing too, is most podcasts are small man operations. They don't have like a team of lawyers at their side to verify all these legal stuff. So like if her operation is literally her and her husband, it's like, it's probably much easier to kind of.
But you would think
get under the rug
in
here.
the process of taking on $10 million, you would do a little bit of due diligence.
That's probably true too, right?
Reasonable criticism.
But it's also like this guy. We don't know the guy's face and stuff like that. Like how much of it is a mask. Like maybe there's a real person, but it's a different name, and he's actually an agent or whatever. Like we don't know the dynamics there. I haven't read the full indictment, but like she probably had phone conversations with this Gregorian guy and things like that. I was like, oh, seems legit. Seems, like that type of stuff too, right?
So it is how we'll see in a trial probably, and this is also why Lauren has not put out any statements. Right? It's going to be a legal matter from now on for her.
Yeah,
so
she can't talk about things.
Right.
That's the unfortunate thing about these types of dynamics.
The question is like, even if she were, could she even get her voice out at this point? Is she going to be censored everywhere as a foreign agent? And just the lack of ability to defend yourself now that this is out there, right, is kind of missing from her. Like her audience is now just gone.
Yeah.
She hasn't tweeted since it happened at all.
That's wild.
It kind of relates somewhat to the Sputnik story as well. So Sputnik is a newswire that is kind of like the equivalent of our AP of sorts, but for Russia. It was designated by the Treasury as a, quote, foreign mission. And what that means is that the entity is designated as officially recognized by the federal government as a representative of a foreign government or an international organization. Often applies to diplomatic stuff, but it often more applies to like people we don't like. They've also revoked some visa stuff and changed visa statuses for people who work at Sputnik, and really came after it. And we have our friend Ethan Holmes, who is kind of our Russian guy.
Goes by Post from Underground.
Yeah,
sorry,
he's not Russian.
No, he's not Russian, but he speaks Russian.
No, but he knows a lot. He studied a lot of Russian.
But we don't have a Russian guy. I just want to make that clear.
Ethan and I,
or an APAC guy.
Ethan and I used to talk about Dostoevsky a lot. Our love of Dostoevsky. And sorry, Ethan, I am following you. It does this for some reason. You and Liam, just when I pull up your post, it's like, no, you're not following it. I am.
But he put out a tweet, an X post about this whole situation with Sputnik, defending the people in America who work for Sputnik, covering American news for Russian audiences and for global audiences, and basically saying, hey, whatever the upper crust is doing, what I see as a person, as a kid from Montana who's doing his job, trying to cover American politics as fairly as I can and accurately as I can, is that for the most part, it's just hardworking individuals trying to cover the news accurately and to challenge the U.S. government, just like any reporter should, to be truthful and to reconcile the truth with their agenda. And it's kind of crazy because Sputnik's not in any of this other stuff. The Treasury just goes after them without any evidence proceeded at all in their little press briefing that they issued about it, and with the action, like no standard of evidence or like due process or anything like that, said you're now this thing. So what this will mean for Sputnik's still up, it still exists, but what it will mean is that the federal government now has reason and capability to legally spy on and do things, treating them as a foreign agent operating in the United States.
Wow.
It is interesting too. I was just a couple weeks ago listening to a podcast of two CIA guys on what's the guy's name? Danny Jones podcast. He had that Andrew Batamiste guy, the
crazy hair,
the crazy hair guy that goes around. I referenced it in the skiff, but and then he had John Kiriakou on there, who was the whistleblower on the torture programs within the CIA. Like he was a CIA guy, and basically got run out of being able to have any type of job in America life after the torture revelations that he revealed of the CIA. But he has become a media personality on Sputnik. Actually, and RT. And I remember them having a conversation, and Batamiste, I can never say his name. I can't remember what his name is, but he's kind of always like the CIA defender kind of guy. He's like the young CIA defender that goes on all these podcasts. He's done like Andrew Schultz and Lex Friedman and all this stuff. And he was really challenging Kiriakou of being like, well, you know that, Russian spy games, and you know that they're trying to peddle and use your influencer as a dissident here, and you are abandoning your country by being on, and being on that. And Kiriakou's thing was like, hey, fuck the CIA. Like after what they did to me, like I am going to just like speak what I believe and try to get us much more towards a 1776 moment here in America. And if they want to platform me because nobody
will commence again,
and if they want to platform me because nobody is essentially allowed to here in America, then okay, I'm going to do this because I have to feed my family, right? Like that type of stuff, right?
Yeah. The irony is that we have an institution of the First Amendment in the United States that says that dissident voices should be allowed and shouldn't be repressed by the government. And then we have a government and a CIA, NSA, military censorship program specifically meant to cultivate a very specific non-dissident point of view in the American public operating in contradiction to that First Amendment. And one of the only ways to get around that system and is for some people like this guy, like Adam Kokesh and others, was to go to Russian money and say, like, in order to get a platform, in order to get ideas out in my supposedly pluralistic society, I have to do this because I can't go to anybody else, because if I do, you're gonna turn the dogs on them. These guys are actually inoculated from the money, right? And that's a sad state of affairs that is actually established by government control of speech and online media, and trying to push people towards very certain directions away from actual criticism of the government.
It's crazy.
Whoa.
It's a sad story to hear.
It's kind of weird. I just went to John Kiriaku's Substack and it's taken down.
Really?
I don't know what's going on there.
Uh-oh.
So I don't know. It's just because I just went to his Twitter feed because I wanted to confirm if he did stuff. I know he does stuff with RT, but I think he mentioned Sputnik as well. So I was just trying to confirm that. But I went to his stuff and they won't let me open the links.
Oh.
So I don't know what is going on there.
TBD. Well, it'll be interesting to see how this develops. And obviously a lot of fallout already. We'll see, how Tim Pool is able to kind of make his case, although it seems like he's kind of safe, viewed in the indictment, at least legally safe.
As a victim.
Yeah.
In the media, of course, I'm sure he will not be portrayed as such. But nevertheless, it'll be interesting to see how this develops. And, if you want to support the show, become a member.
Yeah.
Because we're not taking any Russian money.
Well, and now I guess let's cut to chatting with Liam.
Yeah, let's bring Liam in.
on the line. So
we've got our friend Liam McCollum here to discuss with us our next story all around the the furor, as it was put by Daryl Cooper after his ironic,
the furor?
Really,
the furor,
furor. F-U-R-O-R. That's how he described it. But also the other kind. I know. It's actually a really apt word for this situation. Anyways, Liam is
phrasing anymore.
Liam is here to join us to talk about what's going on regarding World War II and Churchill, particularly in the aftermath of Daryl Cooper's appearance on Tucker Carlson's podcast. We've got Liam here joining us. Liam,
how dare he defend Hitler?
How dare he? Liam, thanks for being here, man. How are you?
Thanks for having me. It's great.
So, well, you've been kind of outspoken on this, and we'll get into that. We're going to play a clip really quick just so our viewers and listeners have the context of the interview between Daryl Cooper of the Martyr Made podcast and Tucker Carlson. So let's play that.
But not just the war in Ukraine, so many others. Churchill's the good guy. Neville Chamberlain's the bad guy. It's too pat. It's obviously quite banal. But it also has justified like the killing of millions of people since the end of the Second World War. And so I do think it's fair to ask like what really was going on. So for example, and I'm American, I'm not English, so I don't have any weird motive in asking this, but how would you assess Winston Churchill?
I got in trouble with my podcast partner, Jocko Willink, one time because he's a New England Dutchman whose his family, it's near and dear to they're Dutch, but very near and dear to their heart that Winston Churchill is a hero, right?
Well, everyone
thinks that. He really thinks that. And I told him that I think, and maybe I'm being a little hyperbolic, maybe, but I told him, maybe trying to provoke him a little bit, that I thought Churchill was the chief villain of the Second World War. Now, he didn't kill the most people. He didn't commit the most atrocities. But I believe, and I think when you really get into it and tell the story right and don't leave anything out, you see that he was primarily responsible for that war becoming what it did, becoming something other than an invasion of Poland. Or just, at every step of the way, like people are very often, I find, surprised to learn. There's a two-step process.
Well,
right?
why don't you just make the case for that? Okay, so you've made your statement. A lot of people are thinking, well, wait a second. You just said Churchill my childhood hero, the guy with the cigar.
Yeah. Well, and the next thought that comes into their head is that, oh, you're saying Churchill was the chief villain, therefore his enemies, Adolf Hitler and so forth, were
Stalin,
the protagonists, right?
Yeah.
They're the good guys if you think he's a villain. That's not the case. That's not what I'm saying. Germany, look, they put themselves into a position, and Adolf Hitler is chiefly responsible for this, but his whole regime is responsible for it, that when they went into the East in 1941, they launched a war where they were completely unprepared to deal with the millions and millions of prisoners of war, of local political prisoners and so forth that they were going to have to handle. They went in with no plan for that.
The context here is all of Twitter is afire right now because Tucker had a Nazi sympathizer. That's kind of how Daryl Cooper is being labeled on this right now, where you have all of generally the pro-war neocon types that are just like, I can't believe it. Hitler was the bad guy. Obviously, Churchill's the good guy. And there's a little bit more of maybe an adult conversation that can be had here of like, okay, it's not just good versus bad. Like there's also context to the war, and there's all the lead up to the war, and not necessarily everybody has their hands clean in this, right?
Yeah.
And Liam, you've been very vocal on Twitter. You've put some threads out, and you've been causing up a little bit of a stir because what are your thoughts on this, I guess?
Yeah, well, so I first started looking into this 2 years ago in December of 2022 after Zelensky was invited to Washington, D.C. to testify in front of Congress, and Democrats and Republicans started comparing Zelensky with Winston Churchill. So I saw the storm that was happening on Twitter, and I didn't really pay too much attention to the actual debates that were happening on Twitter. But I was just like, oh, well, Winston Churchill is trending, so I might as well just repost these threads that I made from 2022. So yeah, if you have that thread of me comparing or the thread of people comparing Zelensky to Churchill, that'll kind of demonstrate.
Yeah, Joe just pulled it up here. And it is a thing back from December 2022. You have a thread here of Nancy Pelosi comparing Zelensky to Churchill. You have Brett Baer from Fox News comparing Ukraine Zelensky to Winston Churchill. So it's generally bipartisan.
Hillary Clinton,
because the left loves Churchill apparently, right?
Well, I mean, when he's not racist,
exactly. That's kind of the point here, right?
Yeah, and I guess what I was really reacting against, and I think in that same thread, I mentioned that I took a photo of Zelensky, in front of Pelosi and Kamala Harris, and said, this is the consequence of Marvel culture, treating everything as a Marvel movie where, we have good guys and bad guys on both sides. And so I tried to bring about parallels and actually look into Winston Churchill and see if there are any comparisons, some realistic comparisons, because I think, as Daryl Cooper mentioned in this interview, there's sort of these mythologies that are created around historical figures. So, when the Russia-Ukraine invasion happened, Zelensky was being compared to Winston Churchill, Putin was being compared to Hitler, and then anyone who wanted no U.S. intervention in Ukraine was called an appeaser, was called
Neville Chamberlain.
Yeah, Neville Chamberlain. And so I just looked back at some resources, and I found Ralph Raico, who is a great historian out of the Mises Institute, and Cato. He had this piece called Rethinking Churchill. And basically he makes the case that Winston Churchill embroiled the United States in World War I and World War II by luring the United States to get in conflict with Britain's enemies. And there were actually quotes from Churchill where he's writing in his memoirs, and he's saying there are many kind of maneuvers in war, some only of which take place on the battlefield, but the maneuver which brings an ally into the field is as serviceable as that which wins a great battle. So philosophically and strategically, Churchill was very interested in getting, larger powers behind him. And what we're seeing with Ukraine, obviously, is that without NATO backing Ukraine and without the U.S. guaranteeing, missiles to Ukraine, we wouldn't have had this war. Ukraine wouldn't have been incentivized to be as belligerent. And, also the Russians wouldn't be viewing the United States as a villain because of the financial tie with foreign aid. But what I found when looking into Ralph Raico's essay was that when Churchill was the first Lord of Admiralty in World War I, Britain had imposed a blockade on Germany. And in response, Germany started sending U-boats to British shores, patrolling them. And there are letters where Churchill is actually writing to the president of the Board of Trade. And he says, it is most important to attract neutral shipping to our shores in the hopes especially of embroiling the United States into war with Germany. So we have that in handwriting, Churchill saying that about trying to lure the United States into war. And, May 7th, 1915, the Lusitania, which was one of the largest passenger liners at the time in the world, it had over 128 American civilians on board, and it also had munitions on board. And Churchill had also instructed all of the British ships to ram into German submarines. So he was essentially like hoping that something like this would happen. And sure enough, the Lusitania was sank, and this eventually led the Americans to turn on the Germans and basically set up for U.S. intervention in World War I. And I think Ralph Raico and a lot of people like Pat Buchanan that Dave Smith and Martyr Made has talked about is, they make the argument that without World War I, we likely would not have had World War II.
Yeah, I'm actually reading Pat Buchanan's book right now. What is it? Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War.
Yep.
I'm about halfway through it. I just started it yesterday, and he basically spends the first half of the book just laying out everything back going to like 1860 and the lead up to all of this, and then you have World War I, and goes into World War II, and it becomes that thing where the reason why the book is called The Unnecessary War is because that was actually a Churchill quote, right? Even Churchill was saying it was largely unnecessary, but he was constantly stoking the flames of it and provoking it, right? Actually, there was a lot of similarities with Ukraine. Honestly, a lot of it felt like the relationship between Germany and Britain at the time felt very similar to the relationship between Russia and America, with then stoking all these things kind of in between until it kind of came to this point where Hitler's just like, well, okay, we got to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
It felt very similar to that.
Yeah.
I think an important context is that the war was essentially a stalemate before the United States got involved. Like it likely would have been that we would have still had like the German Kaiser and all of the European monarchs in Europe. And it just would have been the same state that it was before World War I. So I think a lot of people, when they hear you kind of defending Germany in World War I, they're like, oh, well, the evil people that were in World War II. But like, we have to remind the audience that the Nazis aren't around at this point. The German monarch is still a thing. And as a consequence of World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, that's actually that created the fertile ground for a nationalist movement like the Nazis. So Pat Buchanan kind of makes the argument that World War I and World War II are actually two different phases of the same 30-year war. And without World War I, you don't have the Nazis at all. You don't have the Holocaust. And so if it is true that Churchill intentionally tried to kill U.S. civilians in order to bring the United States into war on behalf of the British, I think even going further back than Daryl Cooper does in his interview with Tucker, Churchill is very responsible for, the entire 30-year war.
Wow. So we've talked a lot on this show about mythologies, particularly you, Kyle.
Yeah.
You refer to things like democracy as sort of like a founding mythology of the West or the United States. And
It's a shibboleth.
but something that was interesting that came out of this interview with Daryl Cooper and Tucker was defining what mythology means in this context, which I think might be a little bit misleading to people who have heard us talk about it before. But he clarifies that like mythology, it doesn't mean that it's something that's like mythical, like made up or false, right? It's really just like a founding ethos,
founding narrative, founding principle. Like it's a founding narrative that creates principles out of it that then derive all your future decisions, right?
Right.
And note that World War I's rhetoric itself in the United States was the war to save democracy.
Right.
Right. So
yeah,
that's
it's very Woodrow Wilson. Yeah,
that's Woodrow Wilson's rhetoric.
We have
right?
we have to make the world safe for democracy. Is Woodrow Wilson in World War I?
Yeah, and is the reason that there's been such sort of like uproar, particularly on the right, over this conversation because we're challenging these like fundamental underlying, narratives that sort of underpin our vision of who we are as the West generally?
Because it's almost like you should almost look at it where before the World Wars, America was one thing, and after the World Wars, America was a different thing. And that's after World War II is the beginning of the unipolar moment, right? Where you start to see, it starts to split off where you have America and the Soviet Union, and then eventually it becomes just America, right? Many decades down the road. So this is the beginning of the American empire at large comes out of it, because this is where Britain has the massive decline after massive amounts of wars and them just being completely ruined by it, and Britain takes a massive decline while America hits the rise, right? And this is our founding mythology of like, oh, America comes in to save the day, we saved all the Jews, we saved all the and that becomes, so any type of questioning towards that or anything, the story's a little bit different there. Oh, the story's a little bit different there. And it's not necessarily like Holocaust denialism, which is what they'll label. Like they're basically labeling Tucker and Daryl Cooper like Holocaust deniers,
right?
Because it's not as clear cut as just like Hitler was the most evil person ever, and then everybody else was the good guys, right? I was like, well, we did side with Stalin, Like,
so are the people that are challenging this sort of more nuanced look into this topic sort of categorized as like maybe the imperialist class, the people that want to see the United States as like the world police?
I think it's actually worse than maybe we framed it up front. Just to be clear, like you got guys like Stephen Gorka and a lot of people in the America First world who are condemning Tucker as well. And the reason why is because they're conservative. This gets to the heart of the problem of the conservative worldview that it just has to deal with, right? If you're conservative, if you're familiar with what the worldview is, which is that you need a continuum between the past, the present, and the future in your ideas, in your founding myths, and the things that bind you together and create a nation.
Because generally, as a conservative, you're trying to preserve the past.
Yeah, well, at least that the founding ideas that make the conservative movement, going all the way back to Edmund Burke, but also re-articulated by the National Review and people like that since that time in the United States, is that there's something really important about preserving the past. And it isn't principle looking per se, it's myth looking, right? It's not saying what was true about the past, that it isn't interested in that. It's what binds us together from the past.
That's the story.
And that's the myth.
I think there's an added layer on this too. Because of Israel-Palestine, there is this underlying narrative of you have a lot of people who look at the Jews are in their holy book that they've never read, and then 2,000 years later, evil mustache man came and tried to slaughter them all, and therefore Israel-Palestine, right? And there's just this like logical track that exists there. And so right now it's like, well, if you're going to be Neville Chamberlain and you're not going to be Churchill, like, that's why we gotta bomb the shit out of this one group, because they want to just do a Holocaust just like Hitler did. And there's these like very sophomoric logical like train tracks that they're on. And so anything that kind of slightly disrupts that railroad that they're on right there, it's like all of a sudden, everybody just kind of like skitters out of control, right?
Yes. And I think to David's point about like the conservative idea in trying to protect myths is very important here, because I think this is precisely why Tucker Carlson, Daryl Cooper, and Pat Buchanan are such a threat to these guys. Like they hate these guys more than they hate like Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
Because they are also conservative and they also care about history and these myths. And Pat Buchanan and these guys are actually trying to present a better telling of history that actually like derives real principles and lessons from it that will like help preserve the United States. And, you know, one of the Pat Buchanan's like main thesis in Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War is that World War II, or what he would say is the 30-year war, like really destroyed Britain. Like after the fact, Britain has just like, and he looks at like demographic trends and stuff like that to make the case that Britain is demonstrably worse after World War II. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is the case that many libertarians are trying to make about a potential war with Russia or a war with Iran, is that if we fight another war, just looking at like the state of America right now, you know, after World War II, the United States replaced Britain as the world empire. But after the next war, there's a real risk with global trends, with BRICS, with, you know, realignments on the world stage, where after the fact, the United States goes the same path as the British did, and we're no longer the world power. So I think that this is really the real lesson that these like true conservatives, these, you know, like of the old right kind of spirit, is that like fighting wars is actually something that is really bad for nations and for empires. It's simultaneously trying to exert strength externally while like, you know, gutting out your soul at home.
I think that's right. And there's a real challenge that we're in right now with this moment of the America First movement trying to decide what it is, right? And it has to, and we can't get an America First movement that sticks without realigning the mythology. And World War II is going to be a part of that. Now, it doesn't have to look like Holocaust denial, right? It doesn't have to look like, you know, Hitler was really the good guy or some bullshit like that. But it probably has to look like, hey, these are things that happened that don't need to determine our future, right? And our future can be determined by our principles first. And what are our principles as America First movement? That is an alliance between libertarians and nationalists and other folks who are interested in trying to restrain the empire. And a big part of this is that much of the language that is also being challenged alongside this. This is a great book that we can check out too, because we talked about those other ones. It's called Tomorrow the World. And it's the formation of using the Council on Foreign Relations and other major think tanks of the justification for the expansion of the global empire. And it's very clear when you read that book that it's very clear that there's a certain set of people who are saying, hey, this is our moment to turn America into a giant empire. And that was done consciously in order to preserve democracy and all these ideas and myths. When you look at that and if you want to actually roll that back and save America in the long run, you have to address those underlying things. Like, what is isolationism? Is that more than an epitaph, or does it actually describe anybody? Was Churchill just a deity, or was he a human being? Right. And the more you humanize him and make him into a human being, or would make the Germans into a people rather than just a villain. Right. There's only two things you can kill unrelentingly in a video game forever, and it's always okay: zombies and Nazis. Those are the only two things, right? And sometimes you get Nazi zombies, right? That combination is the highest form. Maybe aliens. Aliens is another one.
Sure.
We could always kill an alien from outside the planet. So, like anything that does those, that undermine that, have to. It's like the body politics antiviral, right? It's the white blood cells of the body politics momentum to attack that. That's why I think it's such a broad group of people who are now turning on these folks and attacking Tucker and others.
Do you guys think that this is a short-lived media moment, or is this something that's going to result in more widespread shift on the right about how we perceive these mythologies?
I think it's a philosophical shift. And I think most of this is being challenged by the under 40s of the new right, if we want to call it that. Like whatever this collection, this hodgepodge of a bunch of characters that are coming in, a lot of it is like
the Unity Party.
The Unity Party. I don't know what it is. Well, because RFK just is not on this side, so I don't know if I would put him on that. But like the older folks that tend to be much more bought into the Zionist mythology are going to be the ones that are resistant to it. But the younger folks just in general are not bought into the old mythologies. And the younger folks are in general in the new right just much more cynical of the narratives that are force-fed to us as like in youth, right? At least the ones that are a little bit more paying attention, like the ones that are, you know, people like Liam, people like us, right?
Yeah.
We're more cynical of just broad sweeping narratives that we're kind of forced to believe. Like
Sure.
we're just like, this is the way it is, no matter what, don't question it, blah, blah. And we're all kind of like, well, let me listen to a podcast on it. You know, like we kind of go into that, right?
Differentiating founding principles from founding mythologies, right? Like, because guys like us obviously think about things from a principled standpoint as much as possible and we try to, communicate that. So there is a difference there, right? Like,
well, let me define your epistemology you're talking about there, right?
Yeah.
There's a difference between saying there's a broad story arc that I want to fit my worldview into versus saying, okay, what do I think is true first? What do I think is true for humanity? What do I think is true about morality? What do I think true about the facts of the case that we're discussing? That's principle thinking. And the first thing I mentioned, what's the narrative that I want to fit into? That is conservative thinking, right? That is and that's very specifically, if you talk to most of the like intellectual conservatives about their thinking, you call it a philosophy, they say, no, it's not a philosophy. It's a worldview. Because they're conscious of that fact, that they're not doing that, right? They might even extract principles from their worldview, and they might even advocate for those principles. That's where conservatives are at their best. But the inversion of that, the principles first thinking, it can lead you in more directions, right? Now, the conservative argument against that is like, but the problem is that without the continuum of the past, you have a high error rate of going into a negative direction that creates outcomes that you can't foresee, right? You need to learn the lessons of the past. You need to fit and make sure everyone's moving together. Otherwise, you get sociological disintegration and individual atomization and all these other criticisms.
But to Liam's point, isn't not approaching this narrative with nuance and understanding that it's not just a Marvel comic threatening the fact that we're going to not learn the lessons of the past here? I mean, because Liam just pointed out, we're seeing a lot of parallels here with the narratives around the Ukraine war. So how are conservatives reconciling those?
Well, they don't care about the principles, right? They're not interested in that. Like, you got to understand, this is an emotion because it's emotion that, and this is why conservatism is fundamentally more appealing to more people than libertarian thought and other philosophical thought, right? Because it requires less energy, it requires way more, and it taps into your emotions far greater, right? Because you can say, no, we're the good guys, and you want to feel like the good guy, right? You want to say, oh, well, we had to, we're the indispensable nation. We had to take on the global empire, and we actually don't really want to, but I guess we have to. I mean, that's the whole argument that what's his name from National Review, the CIA guy.
Buckley.
Yeah, Buckley. Yeah, that's his whole argument. We gotta, because the communists exist, we have to be this empire, even though it's against our principles as a country and our entire mythology before World War II, right? And so there's a way to appeal those conservatives. You say, hey, our actual mythology pre-exists that. It's actually in 1776, not in 1945.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how you get those guys on board, maybe. But that might require some movement. And I think too, we might be overestimating the impact of this too, right? There's a whole nother side to this, which is that now Martyr Made is the #1 podcast in the world, right?
Yeah, it's pretty,
right. Like,
it's pretty funny.
The graph is insane. It's like going along, good growth, and it's just like skyrockets after this.
These are the things that are the setting of the groundwork, because what you said, David, earlier was that we kind of have to create our new mythologies. And we're in the process of creating our new mythologies. Like, I think that's what this whole new right phenomenon with all this big tent that's forming is. And one of the problems with the big tent is it's very decentralized, and there's a lot of like sub ideologies that exist. And as soon as the cult of personality that is Trump is gone, they probably go to civil war again if something doesn't tie them together. So like, we need to start building new mythologies that tie all this together, right? Because it's not going to last forever.
I do think appealing to 1776 is a great way to do that too. I mean, like, just quoting George Washington when he's saying like, stay clear of entangling alliances, and then you can like couch that in historical lessons for conservatives that really appeal to history and say, well, look at World War I. I mean, without the entangling alliances, between Austria, Hungary, and Germany, and the conflicts with Russia and Serbia, like, we wouldn't have had World War I, which wouldn't have created World War II. And then apply that today and say, like, without an entangling alliance with NATO and all of Europe, we likely wouldn't have had a conflict with Russia, and just learning lessons from history, but are grounded in our identity that is based in 1776.
Right. Which is empire is bad, right?
Yeah.
We were colonies who separated from an empire. When we entangle ourselves and try to be an empire, we become weaker. Empires don't last, they're bad, and they harm the people in the empire, rather than this inversion that we're currently kind of struggling with, which is because I want avocados in the wintertime, it justifies the global empire, or some like argument like that. You know what I mean?
Do not threaten the avocado to us. That is not the way to win
that's
the
how
youth.
we get the disease. But you know, like these kind of arguments are always the ones that kind of have in the periphery. But the fundamental is, what does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to live in this country? That's why Vivek has been able to kind of elicit so much of that, right? Because he's bringing to consciousness the underlying unconscious insecurity that we're at because of our empire, right? Because we have all these sociological problems, I think, in a large part because of the global empire. And it's boomerang effects of our loss of identity as we've given up, or as we're taught the principles of truth and justice in the American way, and then implement a completely different set of beliefs and value structures and systems in our actual policy.
Yeah. Liam, what do you think the ramifications or the downstream effects of this are? Is this a short-lived thing, or is this going to have, deeper impact in the movement?
I think it's a part of a broader trend. I mean, you guys talked about Tucker's interview where they were talking about the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Like it feels like this is the same thing. And like I said, I think that Tucker is more of a threat to these guys than like a Hillary Clinton type, because it's just funny that these like 1 minute clips go viral and then take over Twitter, conservative Twitter, for a whole week. So I think it'll probably continue to happen. I mean, we'll see what happens in terms of foreign policy on the global stage, because that will probably inform a lot of it. But I just, I think that we really have to try to get conservatives to see that the only principle of World War II, not the only principle of World War II is, that we appeased Hitler and Neville Chamberlain appeased Hitler. Like, that can't be the only lesson. We also have to tell them there are lessons about entangling alliances and war guarantees and stuff like that. And I think people are waking up, and that's why we're seeing such a strong reaction on the right.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, I think I think Jordan Peterson was the phenomenon he was because he was incorporating emotion with fundamental principles by connecting it to religious ideas and other kinds of like larger story arcs and mythos, right? That the foundation of the universe is logos and the word, and this idea of truth and the word being the thing that binds us together, not just the mythos around World War II, but rather our fundamental axioms as Western civilization. And that's where we're at. We're at a fundamental crossroads between truth and myth. And which way are we going to go? We're going to go with a satisfying myth that makes us into a caricature good guy that makes Winston Churchill in the caricature good guy. Or are we going to go with truth, which was that Winston Churchill wore silk pajamas underneath his clothes for his entire life.
Really?
Even serving in Africa. He never learned how to drive a car.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm the guy who was like, when I was a kid, when I was younger, when I was in my early 20s, I was just a generic conservative, right? I was just a generic kind of right-winger. And I read The Last Lion, which is a huge biography of Winston Churchill. And that book, I was just like, this guy's he was a madman. He was a completely different life. He was a Victorian nobleman, right? In an area at the end of the Victorian era. And so he had a completely different life than any person could understand. Like it was wild. And the way he celebrated death, the way he celebrated conflict, the things he did in Africa and in the Middle East on behalf of the British Empire before he was in the Admiralty is shocking and crazy. And it's interesting that we have to reconcile that question of who are we really talking about? What is the real truth of the history with this question of what is the thing that will bind us together? And maybe it is that people are flawed and not perfect and not character cutouts and not Marvel superheroes.
I also have another story about the weirdness. Churchill's kind of weird, if we can say that. He's kind of weird. Allegedly, this is according to The Guardian, written in 2000, a lot of Churchill's famous speeches that he did on radio broadcasts, we shall fight them on the beaches, that type of stuff. Those were all voice acted. They weren't him. He was too drunk to do them, because dude's just a total drunkard. And they were voice acted by a guy named Norman Shelley, who you might know as Winnie the Pooh.
No way.
Most of his broadcasts apparently discovered after the fact were done by a voice actor.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is what we didn't want to tell you.
Oh, that's just great. You wanted the authentic human reaction to that.
But it's also the same thing. Like you'll see people that will have stories about, like, this guy was a big man child. Like people would like walk in on him like playing with action figures, playing war games with action figures, and he'd get like really upset because they're disturbing him. Like,
not because they caught him with the action figures, but because they disturbed him. Leave me alone, Mom.
Yeah, it's like he's a bit of a man child, right?
Wow.
I think that another opportunity we have here with the right in particular is trying to really expose like the ideological inconsistencies on the right, like the conflicts that we're seeing, where, you know, they have simultaneously tried to maintain that they are in favor of small government and also in favor of like strong empire for a few decades here. And I think part of really unveiling this mythology is also looking back at the World War II politicians and the people who actually got us into the World War I and World War II, and like their domestic policies too, because I find it very odd that you have these kind of grandiose figures like Woodrow Wilson, FDR, Hitler, Stalin, you know, Churchill coming about all at the same time. Like when there's like this sort of fascist impulse around the world where all of these leaders embraced concentration camps in World War II. Like FDR, you know, interned Japanese in the United States. Churchill interned some Jewish people too in Britain. So like this isn't, you know, like what is this global trend, and why are conservatives making a hero out of someone like FDR when they would examine FDR's domestic policy, they would be absolutely opposed to everything that he imposed in the United States, and really trying to like get to the crux of that. And you know, Jonathan Newman, I wanted to read this quote. Jonathan Newman found a quote by Mises from 1958 where he's talking about Churchill and the policies that he implemented. And he says, and while this was going on in Germany, Great Britain during the Second World War did precisely what Germany did. Starting with the price control of some commodities only, the British government began step by step, in the same way Hitler had done in peacetime, even before the start of the war, to control more and more of the economy, until by the time of the war ended, they had reached something that was almost pure socialism. Great Britain was not brought to socialism by the Labour government, which was established in 1945. Great Britain became socialist during the war through the government of which Sir Winston Churchill was the prime minister. So I think it's really getting at this like tension we're seeing on the right, where, you know, you had alluded to Buckley and his paper where he's justifying, you know, creating a socialist government on our shores to fight back against the Soviets. And, you know, he's trying to appeal to libertarianism in the beginning of that essay by quoting Albert J. Nock. But he's like, okay, in the meantime, while we're trying to fight this war, if we want to defeat the empire, the Soviet empire, we have to embrace socialism in the meantime. So really trying to expose that and say that there are inconsistencies here, and your heroes from World War II were not conservatives. They were not fiscally conservative, and they were not, you know, conservative when it comes to foreign policy either.
Yeah, you say price controls. Isn't that the Kamala policy that everybody's complaining about? That's crazy.
Well, I was just going to say, it's very similar to the left saying we need to save democracy by suspending democracy, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's also the same thing as Liam's bringing up Buckley here. Is Buckley largely was the person that created the tent for the neoconservatives and flipped conservatism over the last several decades. Like a lot of that is the doing of National Review and Buckley. And Buckley really created the stage of who had allowable opinion within the right and who didn't. And that's where we see people like Pat Buchanan, who wrote this book, you know, about Churchill here, the one that I referenced that I was reading, but also people like Murray Rothbard, people like Ayn Rand. Like those people got pushed out of the conservative right by the warmongers, which were largely led by Bill Buckley, who just happened to also be a CIA guy.
It sounds better when you put in a transatlantic accent, right? It just sounds so much more persuasive. If you
and Buckley was Mr. Conservative. He was the darling of conservative media for a long period of time. Like this guy had all the power, and he shifted the right into a very different direction from where its roots were.
And so if you look at our moment and you compare that moment of disintegration and reintegration to a newer formulation, that's a weird way to say that. We're in that moment now, right? We were in that moment in the 1960s. We had a bunch of social strife. We had chaos, Project Chaos. We had, Helter Skelter in the 60s and the hippies movement and all that kind of stuff. We have a very similar set of social disintegration now and a new reformulation. That's actually the most important. And I do recommend people listen to the Tucker Carlson interview because it's not just about Winston Churchill, right? Or about World War II. They get into the idea that there is a human motive, a religious, fundamental human psychological motive to kind of come to a breaking point where you create a sacrifice and then the social unit can come back together again and heal, right? And the 60s was a time of enormous violence and terrible, the 60s and the 70s. And where we're going into that is right now. Look at the Summer of Love back in the 60s and the Summer of Love in 2021 or 2020.
Yeah.
That kind of like social chaos, that's where we're at. And we have the ending of a generation, of the silent generation and the greatest generation in the 1960s and 70s with, the oncoming of that, the oncoming of the greatest generation into politics and to power, the people who served in World War II, into the section of that time. And then we're at that same plate now where the silent generation's gone and the boomers are going away. And now we have Gen X and millennials kind of coming into power and to a new reintegration. That's the question of what's the next thing and how to position. That's a question conservatives have to ask themselves, how to position themselves if you're an America First conservative to be in the right place to make an effect going forward with the new formulation that's coming. Who's our Bill Buckley? Well, our Bill Buckley right now is probably Tucker Carlson. Right. So it's going to be in a tremendously different direction if he can strategically hold together his coalition, his support, his, non-CIA backed, Telegram backed, coalition.
There's also an added thing here too of thinking about where the new right is going, what the neocon right was, and then what the old right was prior to Bill Buckley and the World Wars too, is just kind of hammering in on that is prior to the World Wars, the conservatives at large were very anti going into the wars. So much so that they were getting imprisoned for being anti-war advocates. The whole concept of you can't yell fire in a crowded theater comes from a justification for imprisoning right-wing anti-war advocates. Right? So like, people don't understand that history is they think that, well, the right was just always pro-war. No, there's a very specific moment where the right became pro-war, and now we're going back to the roots. The whole America First idea is much more like a return to the old right, where the old right used to be, right? And that is kind of this moment that we're developing right now, and why I think that this mythology kind of crumbling with the youth in the new right is very important for the future direction of the whole camp as a down the road, right?
Yeah.
And I would add this. So I had mentioned that when Tucker brought up the atomic bomb, it went viral, and then this most recent episode with Daryl Cooper. But remember, there was that 1 minute long clip where they attacked Bill Buckley too, and it had the same exact reaction, and it's because this is like the nerve. And I actually found the quote from his essay, "The Party in the Deep Blue." He says, "We have got to accept big government for the duration, for neither an offensive nor a defensive war can be waged, given our present government skills, except through the instrumentality of a totalitarian bureaucracy within our shores." And then he finishes the quote by saying we need war production boards, central intelligence, atomic energy. And he says, even with Truman at the reins of it all, even with a Democrat at the reins of it all. So that's why they hate they hate Tucker Carlson and Pat Buchanan and Dave Smith so much more than they could ever hate Hillary Clinton. And I really think, like, you know, you had mentioned Jordan Peterson, David, and I found this book upstairs in my library, the Gulag Archipelago, and I went to the index and I was like, well, what did he have to say about Churchill? And so
let's end with this. Yeah.
I found on page 259, he says, so the context here is he's talking about the Polish armies that the British and Churchill had originally given a war guarantee to at the beginning of World War II. And he says, in this way, their years of dangling in the German noose would finally become meaningful. They were pinning all their hopes on the possibility of being useful to the Allies. But the Americans greeted them with a wall of armor and forced them to surrender to Soviet hands, as stipulated by the Yalta Conference. In Austria that May, Churchill perpetrated the same sort of act of a loyal ally, but out of our accustomed modesty, we did not publicize it. He turned over to the Soviet command the Cossack Corps of 90,000 men. And then in the footnote, it says, in their own countries, Roosevelt and Churchill are honored as embodiments of statesmanlike wisdom. To us, in our Russian prison conversations, their consistent short-sightedness and stupidity stood out as astonishingly obvious.
Wow.
So for Jordan Peterson, Alexander Solzhenitsyn was not a fan of Churchill, and I think that we should really actually like dive into history and be honest when looking at history to derive like real principles and real lessons that are conservative and that will kind of actually prolong society and civilization. Because if we take the wrong historical lessons, you know, if we, you know, honestly listen to people like Bill Buckley, maybe we actually end up destroying civilization. And if we get embroiled into another war based off of the idea that, you know, we shouldn't appease leaders and actually, like, if we don't stop Putin now, he'll go into Poland. If we make that mistake again, America might also lose all of its power, which, you know, is not something that conservatives want.
Well said.
Yeah, it's a good spot to end it right there.
Absolutely. Liam, thanks so much for joining us again today. We really appreciate you, man.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate it. And everyone should check out that thread that I have about Churchill. And so if you just search on my profile, it's Winston Churchill conspired to embroil the United States in both World War I and World War II by getting Americans killed. It's like a whole thread of quotes, and I couldn't get through them all. But
we can link it in the show notes.
It's great. Yeah. And you've had a bunch of good threads on this. Definitely go follow Liam on X at @MLiamMcCollum, and follow the Liam McCollum Show on YouTube at Liam McCollum. Liam is our newest partner. We're so excited to have him as a part of the Human Reaction team, and you can look out for a lot more content from him in the future. Liam, thanks again, brother.
Thank you.
And thank you guys so much for watching. We appreciate it. We are going to head to the Skiff, where we're going to chat about Alexa's political bias. Thank you, Amazon, as well as Trump's interview on Lex Friedman. So if you are not yet a member, please do become one. Go to humanreactionpod.com to find out how. We'll see you in the Skiff. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in to Human Reaction. Please be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you want to become a member and support the show financially, check out humanreactionpod.com. And remember,
it's unbelievable that he's already going again. I say I'm going to start recording.
It's like a Pavlovian response.
His bladder's like, it's now. We don't do the podcast. Joe hasn't peed in a week. He's just like, you got to call him up. He's like, time to record.
I have to call him every 3 hours.